And I'll look to committee members, first of all, for disclosures of pecuniary interest. And I'm not seeing any. I just want to mention that we have members from the Accessibility Advisory Committee here today. And so this meeting we've provided closed captioning of this meeting. If you need to look at the screen, it's this one that will have the captioning. And I'm understanding that there may be some technical issues with the captioning. So it may blip out to a blue screen momentarily, but we're working on it, and hopefully that won't happen. And if it does, it will go back as well. Okay, so I'm just going to also let everybody know that we are, and actually for the captioning, I would like to identify myself. I'm Councillor Maureen Cassidy, and I'm the chair of this committee. And we're going to change the order a little bit, and we're going to start with scheduled item 3.1. It is a timed item to begin at 4 p.m., and we're starting with a delegation from the Accessibility Advisory Committee. Ms. Madden, if you would come up to the podium.
There. Obviously, I'm not Ms. Madden. Ms. Madden's with me. I'm Jay Menard. Thank you, Councillor Cassidy, for having us and for allowing us to present to the committee today. In early December, my colleagues, Michael, who's sitting over here, and Jackie presented our report of a summary and compilation of the Accessibility Advisory Committee's open house project that we ran in October. At the time, our only ask was that this committee read through the report and prepare for our presentation. So none of this information that we're going to present in the first third of this documentation should be new, but we have done some additional work, and we've done some compilation of our key asks. So I won't belabor the point. I won't spend a lot of time on the actual recap of this event. First off, we do want to wish everyone a happy National Accessibility Week. Taken from the website, this is a federal initiative, so this is a time for Canadians to promote inclusion and accessibility in our communities and workplaces, as well as to celebrate the contributions of Canadians with disabilities. We feel this is an apt time to make this presentation as well. It dovetails very nicely. So the events themselves, how feedback was collected. We ran 5 open houses from October 3rd to October 14th, 2017. We want to thank council who took time to attend some of these events. Mayor Brown, Councillors Cassidy, Hopkins, and Van Holst all attended one of our 5 meetings, so thank you very much for your support. We followed up with the post-event survey to attendees and also to those who had registered interest but were unable to attend. We also shared that survey through social media channels, and we had a number of targeted feedback acquisition efforts. For example, we had members of our committee actually go out to group homes or go to senior centers to add more information and to really go to those areas and try to actually solicit feedback from the people where they were most comfortable, understanding that not everyone could get out to the events that we tried. Even though we were trying to do a very diverse and broad range of locations, we understand not everybody could attend. And then anecdotal and community feedback from years of community involvement amongst the members on the committee. So we've broken the asks down. We were hoping to make it very symmetrical and do 3 asks of 5. We ended up doing 2 asks of 5 and 1 ask of 6. We broke it down into 3 areas. So we have transit as the first one. And I won't go too much into details, but basically our main requests, the ones that came from our community, was a reduction of wait time to from 3 days to a maximum of 1 day. This is for paratransit specifically. Improvement of service call times to match call wait response times of the larger transit system. One of the things that we had heard over and over was that people were on the phone for hours at a time every morning, almost in a lottery system, hoping to get that call so that they'd be able to book an appointment 3 days in advance. Improve that booking system to meet today's standards, increase the availability of accessible spaces on standard LTZ busing, we've had that correction, or increasing paratransit rides, and then appropriate training and education of transit providers. Again, this is all to improve the experience and provide an equitable experience for people with disabilities to the transit system in the City of London. Second asks focused around employment. So we want the City of London to be a leader in removing barriers currently preventing people with disabilities from becoming employed by committing to the following. So removing those artificial non-job essential requirements from all postings. Those are those items, again, where a driver's license is required when it may not actually be required for the job. Or the greatest challenge that we have, and I see this on the provincial body I sit on, asking for prior experience when we understand that there are significant systemic barriers that prevent people with disabilities from acquiring that type of experience. Providing or improving transit to ensure that people are able to get interviews or jobs throughout the city. Again, people want to get jobs. There are jobs in manufacturing areas or in community areas that are not well serviced by the London Transit Commission at the moment, so that's a barrier to people even applying. If they know they can't get there, they're not going to apply. Providing examples to the community of successfully employed people with disabilities to provide visual representation for youth career aspirational goals. Again, that idea of if you can see it, you can be it, and that we do want to have diversity in our workforce. We want diversity in all aspects of our life. Work with unions to remove those systemic barriers of hiring people with disabilities. Again, that's not an easy one, but it's a challenge that when you're looking at offering flexible work hours, the ability to work from home. Sometimes there are systemic issues within union-structured contracts that prevent that from happening. Working with community partners to improve awareness of accessible hiring best practices and tangible improvements to employment issues. And then our third grouping is infrastructure. So we want the City of London to promote a safe environment and foster equitable access to the community for all Londoners. So we as a committee request that improved notification of construction projects, block passages, road work, bus route changes, pedestrian crossovers. There are a number of issues. If you're in a wheelchair or if you're visually impaired and you're walking down the street and all of a sudden you come to a barrier, if you have to walk a block or 2 blocks back because you haven't been notified in advance, that is a significant challenge that we face. Work with heritage departments to find a human-focused solution to promote accessibility in heritage-designated buildings. We're not saying one over the other. We respect the fact that heritage is an issue and that we do want to promote our built environment heritage, but we want to strike a balance so that people within the community can enjoy all aspects of the community. Change snow removal minimums and prioritize pedestrian pathways and bus access points. Commit to ensuring all community gathering areas and parks under the city's mandate be fully accessible. Ensure city-funded housing programs live up to AODA compliance metrics. And commit to a review and, if required, an update of the 2007 FAS report by the end of 2018. And with that, I will pass it off to Jackie Madden, the chair of our committee.
Okay, hi, I'm Jackie Madden, Chair. Thank you, Jay, first of all, for presenting this. This was a pretty significant undertaking, and I think it was pretty hard to pare down all of the things that were said, and I think these things best summarize what was asked for. We understand that things don't happen overnight, and that we're not going to walk away from here tonight and see all of this is put in place tomorrow. But we hope that this is a starting point for you to look at and figure out how we should best attack it, and hopefully it'll result in some change down the road. As a group, however, we're kind of skeptical that anything will ever come of this. We have had a pretty frustrating bunch of years as an Accessibility Advisory Council. We feel that Council has consistently disregarded, ignored, or dismissed our recommendations and the needs of the accessibility community. We've found that even when things have been approved, they often fail to be implemented. We really feel like we become just a box that you guys tick off, that you're meeting what you have to meet by the province, but you're not actually listening to what we say. We really feel that our consultation is not enough, action is, and our efforts have historically been met with inaction. In the next few slides, we have a history of the bunch of things that we came up with kind of off the top of our heads, of things that just have been ignored or not followed through with since this council has been on. I can read through them all. Failure to begin council we met with council, I don't know how long ago it was, several months ago, or with them. the clerk, I guess, to try and get the right accessible things in place at your meetings. As simple as reading a notification at the start of a meeting on what supports are available. It still hasn't happened. There's continued failure to mandate and enforce temporary paths of travel around construction and construction for road and sidewalks. And we've worked on that a lot. We have repeatedly asked for accessible taxi data, which we still have not heard anything from. There was, all of you know, the closed captioning issue, which was quite embarrassing. And also ignoring our subsidized pass recommendation. The Medway Valley was another thing that we really felt, despite overwhelming support from environmentalists and copious amounts of negotiation to develop the accessible plan for the region, due process was cast aside in favor of politicking, and our community was a casualty of that debate. The failure to reinstate temporary cuts to accessible funding, the cavalier implementation of accessible community gardens, which we've been in front of CAPS 3 times, and I'm still not sure that anything's done on that, although I believe there's something underway. We had really a lack of support and attendance from council at the open houses. At first, there was no ACAC representation on the poverty panel, no inclusion of ACAC's input regarding fads, therefore there's been no real change. Last-minute removal of support on accessible playground survey. We also required 3 appearances at CAPS for the mayor's award name change, and continuing deferral of issues related to paratransit. So that's kind of a summary of the things that we're really frustrated with. And I guess as a group, we feel that council has kind of given us a vote of no confidence, that perhaps we aren't providing you information in a clear enough way to make these changes. We're not exactly sure what, but we're a group that's very frustrated. And I'll let Michael's going to continue from here.
How do I go through this?
Just arrow there.
All right. So I'm speaking before you as the longest serving member of the Accessibility Advisory Committee. I've been doing this for nearly 10 years through 3 terms of council, 4 mayors, and was looking forward to a 4th term, and with the decision by Mayor Brown to not run again, a 5th mayor. Unfortunately, at this point in time, the Accessibility Advisory Committee and all of our active members have decided that we will be submitting our resignations en masse. We do not feel that we are adequately supporting our community, that the messaging that we have tried to send is ineffective. And that is either, as Jackie said, a vote of no confidence from this council or our ineffectiveness as a committee. Either one of those is not doing our community justice. We are not serving the people that we volunteered to serve. And we, as a group, decided we could not, in good conscience, continue to serve when we're not making the changes that our community needs. I've spoken before members of council many times, and I've talked about the fact that I do this for my son and for others like him. For the first time ever, I need to say that I may not be the best advocate for my son, that I need to step aside, that we all need to step aside. There's 10 or 11 of us here today because we are not being effective in communicating with this council and getting what needs to be done for our community done. Thank you.
Mayor Brown?
And I just want to be sure that you're done with your presentation. Okay. Well, it takes a great deal of courage to criticize. It takes a great deal of courage for you to come here today and for you to be so direct and so clear about your frustrations to this committee. And I know that you're also speaking to all of council when you speak to this committee. And I have to say that I am so sorry that you feel this way, but I understand why you might feel this way. I understand why you do feel this way. I am frankly shocked that something like me starting a meeting at the beginning of each meeting to say, and here are the available supports, is something that hasn't happened. I can start doing that in 2 weeks at our next council meeting, and I'm going to start doing that. And I think what that will do is it will remind us just how few supports are available, and it will remind us what supports that we can work together to add over the course of time. And thank you for recognizing that it takes time to introduce change. But you certainly have my attention today. And I regret deeply that you are here with a message of resignation altogether. And I think that that should all strike us right at our core, how serious this is. And how if a system that we've put into place that allows, or that theoretically is to provide good advice, lived experience advice, people who are parents or who are relatives or who are professionals or who experience things themselves. I mean, just look at the list. And that you feel that we're not taking it, and that I understand on many of the issues that you've highlighted that we didn't take that advice. I can understand how you feel. And I guess my question to you is, through the chair, I recognize that you've prepared letters of resignation from the committee, and I will certainly respect your decision to follow through with these resignations, but I'm wondering if there is some kind of faint hope here where, now that you have our attention, we can develop a task force, for lack of a better word. I'd be happy to volunteer for that. So we can have a serious, difficult, direct conversation about what your advisory committee needs and what we can do as a committee and as a council, and what I can do as the mayor of the City of London to follow through on some of these things. Because it would be incredibly sad if you do follow through with this from our perspective, from my perspective, if you follow through with these resignations. But I would respect that decision, because I understand the seriousness that you're taking this with. But if there's an opportunity for us to try one more time to work together, I'd be willing to put my name forward to do exactly that.
Any other committee members? Councillor Sally.
Thank you for coming, all of you, and thank you for being very direct and frank with us. It's very much appreciated. I don't want to say what the mayor has already said, but I guess I want to have an opportunity to maybe ask you guys some questions and understand. I know you've listed out some of the challenges, but is there anything else that seems to be the breakdown in that communication? I know when the committee is aware of something, we try to make adjustments, like, for example, the closed captioning. We learned about that and try to work immediately to address that. We had a special meeting on a Saturday to address that and try to do what we could with immediacy. So I want to know, so I can learn, where is it that is the breakdown? Because I know we get a lot of agendas and we get a lot of things, and there's definitely no excuse. We'll take responsibility. I think we all will. But trying to learn where sometimes the communication lies, or where are the responsibilities, so that moving forward, there isn't those same issues. So I don't know if one of you is prepared to speak to that or could give us something further.
Mr. Dawthorne.
So the breakdown doesn't seem to be any one spot. There have been times where this council has given direction to city staff and it simply has not been followed through. There's been times where we've spoken or we've put motions forward that have been endorsed and passed through council, and simply no action had been taken.
I was just going to say, they just seem to get lost. They evaporate.
Yeah.
Right?
And, we don't intend to stand here and point fingers, certainly not at just the members here or even the 15 around the horseshoe. There is greater issues. I suspect that if discussions, honest, open discussions were had with other advisory committees, there's probably a number who feel that their actions and their recommendations fail to be fully implemented. Again, this is not pointing fingers at any one or even any 15 of you. This may be a much more systemic issue. In response to Mayor Brown's comments, our intent is not to, walk away, is not to resign. Our intent remains exactly as it always has, is to best serve our community. If we believe, and if we're made to believe that there's an honest commitment from this council to look at the concerns that we've raised, to look at the asks from today, remembering that those came from the community, not from the 13 members of our committee. If there's an honest commitment to that, if there's a willingness to go before council and say, you know what, we need to set some firm expectations. We want to engage our advisory committees better. We definitely want to resolve some of the issues that are impacting our accessibility community. If this council will make that commitment, I feel confident speaking on behalf of our members, because we have spoken quite at length about this, that none of us is here because we want to leave. We would have done that already. We're here because we felt we had no choice but to leave in order to be able to remain effective for our community. We have never seen an advisory committee as being an advocacy committee. We do not feel that we should be playing games, that we should be lobbying for change. Our job as an advisory committee, as we're mandated, is to provide advice. That is what we do. Sometimes the voice of those lobby groups and advocates get way more attention. They're way more vocal, and there's often many more of them. We as a group felt that if we could not be effective as an advocacy group, we would leave. And we could have some of that effect advocating instead of advising. Again, if this council is sincere in its commitment to our community and wants to take a real hard look at the 16 asks from today and some of the concerns over the past term, we are prepared to withhold the resignations because we do believe in what we do. That's why we all came to this. That's why all of you came to this. We're serving the same people. 1 in 7 Londoners has a disability. That's 1 in 7 of your voters, or your constituents, or your family members, your neighbors. We're all in this for the same reason, but somewhere in this process that is breaking down and the messaging is lost.
Thank you for that, and I really do appreciate it. I'm glad that there is still that willingness from you all, and just see you guys are gathering some thoughts. So I know the mayor has some intent and happy to support in his motion. I think maybe we'll craft out to maybe something a little bit bigger than what he was saying, and I think I'll second whatever he might come up with in the interim. And I'm glad to hear that there's at least a willingness from you guys, and I thank you guys. And I'm sorry that this is where it's come to. It's unacceptable, quite frankly, and I think you guys have asked us some very important questions about the systemic issues around why we have these breakdowns in the communication. I think it's only fair for you guys to maybe hear from the administration, because I think I know every time something that you guys ask for, I try to be as supportive as I can, and I vote yay in the favor, and you know, I know we should continue to follow up with everything, but it becomes, a challenge. But I want to ask the staff, if I don't know who, but I see a full complement of staff here today, and if someone can maybe elaborate or explain to me what kind of are the barriers or the challenges. I don't know if someone is here from Human Resources, I know that, or someone from the clerks talking about, because I know specifically just us being able to read a messaging in the beginning seems very simple to me. And I'm glad the mayor is willing to already do that, so I'm sure that will happen at the next council meeting. But I just think that you guys deserve an answer, and the London community deserves an answer, and I'm hoping staff can answer, and if not today, hopefully maybe at council. So I'll look to someone from staff if there's an interest to respond from anyone.
Ms. Photo?
Thanks. So we have done some of the employment recommendations that you suggested. Our website was updated. We've been reviewing job descriptions as they come up for to make sure that we're not asking for things that we don't really need. And on Friday, last Friday, we met with 6 agencies that represent people with disabilities and had a full day with them, talking about how we can help, how does the City of London get to people with our, and they identified some stuff through our online application system, and we're gonna look at all of that and looking to continue to meet with them.
And then, thank you. So I guess I'll continue to hear what my colleagues are saying, and I'll wait for the mayor's motion when it comes up. But I'm just not happy that you guys had to be here in this context, and it's unfair and it's not right, and we have a shared responsibility. And rest assured, moving forward, I will ask those questions, and I know we have a list of, to-do list that needs to be done, and I think we need to work aggressively with a very aggressive timeline. And I'm sure the mayor's motion will probably capture that, because I'll talk to him on the side as well.
Any other committee members? No. Councillor Helmer? Go ahead, Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have been contemplating the delegation and my role on this committee and on council. And so I wasn't rushing to get my hand up to speak because, to be honest, I don't have the words. I've had conversations with members of the committee in the past, and those conversations are one of awe at the amount of energy that they continue to put in to advocating and to working on behalf of our council and on behalf of our city for improvements. I've disclosed in the past, and I'll do it again, that I'm a mother of 2 children with disabilities. And I know how exhausting life can be. I know, I don't know that I could volunteer to do what you do and where you find the time and the energy to do it with all of the challenges that you have every single day, yourself or with your family or those that you support. And so I am appreciative of the work of our advisory committees. I do review the reports, and I do take the advice. And I weigh that advice with everything else that I have to weigh, and try to make the best decisions that I can. I was also looking for a moment, Madam Chair, because I was opening my calendar and I was trying to remember if it was just last meeting that you were here before, or if it was the previous one, when we discussed the mayor's honors list. So I know that we've made some progress on that. And I think that coming to us with a list, and I also looked at my package to see if that was included somewhere, coming with that very concrete list of what you're looking for at least allows us to take a look at that and come back with some timelines in terms of implementation. Because there are easy things that we can do right away, like we did last meeting with the mayor's honors list. I think that is just something that can be done. There are things that take more time and budget considerations, and those things probably won't be considered until the next budget. And so I hope that if there's recommendations in the past to say, you know, we need to make progress on this, that you don't automatically feel like it's dismissed because we haven't, and it may be waiting for that opportunity to interject it. And so I also recall at the last meeting having a discussion, and I'm not sure if it was formalized in the motion, about finding a way to capture some of these items in terms of a deferred matters. I feel like it was captured in the motion, and Madam Chair or the clerk may have a bit more, but I think there's a little bit of a, first of all, the delay, right? So your meeting was a month ago, and we just have that report before us today where you're requesting delegation status for today. So I think we have some of those bureaucratic pieces that are barriers and impediments to moving things forward or seeing things happen, because you guys have talked about them. You've had another meeting since that time and we still haven't dealt with your requests. And so those are some matters that I know have been identified already early on across all of our advisory committees that need to be reviewed. And I know that there's a review in process, and I think that this is an opportunity to include that in the review. Madam Chair, there was another item that I was going to bring forward at another time, but I feel like it may be appropriate at this time because we are in the middle of that review of our advisory committees. I feel that some direction to ensure that we are including the advisory committees in that review would be appropriate. I know I spoke with the clerk and she had indicated to me that that will be part of it. But I want our advisory committees to know that as a counselor and as a committee member on this committee, when we're making those decisions, we do want your input because we need to fix it. But we need to do that by including you in that process, by identifying the barriers and by removing them wherever we can. So those are all my comments for right now. I hope that you have felt heard, as I hope that was your takeaway from the last meeting as well, and to know that I'm going to continue to reflect on the feedback that you've given.
Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, and I want to say first, thank you for the work that you've done up to this point, especially Michael. I mean, you've been involved for a very long time, and I know that a number of committee members have been putting in a lot of work. And I also want to say that I think it's really important that you are insisting on a high standard. I think when run into this kind of frustration, I think the easier thing to do would be to kind of settle for, well, what we can accomplish and these small improvements here and there, and kind of console yourself with things that have changed. And I think that it's to your credit that you're saying, no, you know, what we actually want is up here and we're not getting there, and we're going to insist on that. So I do think it's going to be a difficult road to try and make progress, because I'm just looking over the list of items that you want to see changed that you've agreed on coming out of the open houses. And I remember dealing with some of these issues either at the Transit Commission or here at Council during budget discussions. And well, I say it's difficult because, like, I personally have voted for some of these things and they failed. So, you know, I can say, sure, I support this and this and this of the things that you're asking for. When it comes down to it, it's a group decision about how we move forward on some of these things. And some of these things, it's not even a policy decision, it's how it actually gets implemented. So when you're talking about infrastructure, for example, you know, it is our policy that there will be pedestrian ways for people to get through construction zones. Does that happen all the time? No. I mean, I had a situation on Florence Street a couple of years ago, right by a business called Mobility First, which serves people who have mobility challenges. And they had a lot of trouble with the construction site, getting people through into their business. It was hugely problematic to their business and also to all their customers who were trying to access it. So I think we have made some improvements, but that is something that is an ongoing problem. If you look at Dundas Place right now, for example, they're doing a much better job trying to describe, you know, this is the pedestrian ways that are open and these are the ones that are not, and even updating it every day. But even there, it's a sign, right? And obviously that's not going to help somebody who has a visual impairment, for example. You know, that, so the communications there is better. I think it's significantly improved, but is it good enough? Probably not. When it comes to transit, I'm just going to speak to that briefly because I'm also on the Transit Commission. I want to acknowledge, first of all, that the specialized service is not good, and that it needs to be improved. I do also want to say, though, that we have put 35% more money into specialized transit since we were elected to council than what was in there before. And it's still not good. So we've increased the budget substantially. There's way more service hours, and it's still not good enough. So committing to things like the booking time going from 3 days to 1 day, that's a very big change. I understand why people would want that. I'm not sure how soon we could do that and how long it would take to get there. I'm not sure what improvement of service call times to match the call wait response times are for the larger transit system, and I would like to clarify that because I don't want to commit to something until I know what it means. So that says right there, I don't know if that's the time it takes to get picked up or if it's the time when you're calling in. I'm just not sure. So if you could clarify that.
That's the actual call time. The fact that people are calling in to try and arrange ridership, and they're calling and calling sometimes hundreds of times before they can get an answer.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So that one, again, it's not good now. And we have made changes already, and even then, it's not fully addressed the problem. So we still have people calling lots. and having to call back over and over again. It was really bad. So the queue used to be 8 people long, and we would have it because the wait time was 3 days. I'm telling you folks stuff you already know, but not everybody knows this. So I'm just gonna go through it. People would call as soon as they could to make their bookings 3 days in advance. And they would be on the phone, get a busy signal, and have to call back over and over and over again. And so either people were making the calls themselves, or someone who is helping them make the bookings were making the calls. I would say it's slightly improved now because we have a better system. The queue's longer. It can keep track of when people have called in, so they don't have to drop off and call back. But it's still not great, and you still can't do things like go online and book online, which would avoid the issue on the phone queue altogether. So there are changes still that need to be made there. There's also changes with the scheduling software and how we need to do that. And what I'm trying to say is that all those things are being discussed actively at the Transit Commission. We are trying to make it better. I think where we're running into difficulty is on the actual implementation of that. For example, these changes have taken a lot longer than we expected even at the Transit Commission. They didn't start until very recently, and they're frankly should have been done a long time ago. So that's not a good situation, and I just want to be honest about what the prospects are for really improving that, absent significantly more funding, which is going to be a significant budget discussion at council. So, you know, I would support more funding for specialized transit. Whether you have enough people on council to actually support that beyond what we've already done, I'm not sure. And it's hard for me I can't make any commitments like that. In terms of the employment ones, I think many of these are not expensive, relatively easy to do, and I think are very achievable. And so I support a lot of these things. Improving transit to ensure that people already get to interviews and jobs. We did just have a transit summit about that, especially focused on industrial employers and getting people into the areas that are harder to service by fixed route transit, and making sure that we can work on partnerships between, say, a taxi, accessible taxi, to pick up the first and last mile to get someone from a conventional transit service onto something that could take them the rest of the way. Because it's one thing, if you're walking a kilometer, you know, that's not great for someone who's walking. If you're not walking, a kilometer is even further. And so I think, you know, it's a challenge for the entire community, and it's certainly a challenge for people who have mobility challenges. I think on the infrastructure side, the snow removal minimums, that's an example. When I was reading it over, I said, yeah, I remember trying to get that changed to be lower. And it would have cost something like $350,000 and a year. And we would have had the snow plows out more often, and it failed. It was a close vote, but it failed. And I don't want to tell you about that. You know, we've had, I don't want to rehash them all, but we've had issues where we're trying to get a sidewalk in on a street, and that failed. And that's an existing policy we have in the London plan that says, you know, the compromise will be there'll be a sidewalk on one side of the street when you've got some kind of constraint. And we had a constraint, and even still, we didn't follow it. So it's really difficult. I know you're not happy with how things are going, and I think you should be unhappy with how things are going. I will personally take some responsibility for, you know, I didn't go to the open houses. There were a lot of them. We all have busy schedules, but I think I could have squeezed one of them in, and I didn't, and so I'll take personal responsibility for that. And insofar as the Transit Commission is involved, I think we need to do a better job. We do have our own accessibility advisory committee around specialized transit, but I think there's some kind of coordination issue there where we have discussions happening here that are not really connecting with what's happening at the Transit Commission. And I think that there's some systemic things we probably should change at that level to make it better. So I'm interested in all these things that you've identified. I'm glad that you're being clear about how fast some of them can happen. Some of them are really big, some of them are not so big. And some of them I think require constant attention. It's not like a one-time change. It's an implementation thing that will require more of a culture shift. And those will take some time and be very difficult. So those are my comments for now.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Armstrong.
Well, one never knows where to begin in a situation like this. First of all, my apologies for this situation as a councillor. I guess I would have liked to seen the city manager here tonight. I wish we would have sort of known how this was going to unfold, because we as elected officials, we set policy, and we expect those policies to be followed. And, you know, and I don't think any one of the current staff members here should have to explain individually. I think the city manager should be here to give comments on this issue, because I don't think we're going to find that it's just one specific area, but many different areas that have not met your expectations. You know, I think back just a little while ago, we temporarily approved of a park in my area of the city. And that was a decision of council. And while that debate was going on, I talked about inaccessibility of this park and that there's no pathways. There's barriers if you want to sit on a bench. Believe it or not, there's a concrete barrier from grass up to where the bench is this big. It does not meet provincial standards. And yet, this council approved it as a temporary park, and it's been there for many, many months.
Councillor, Mr. Dawthorne would like to respond.
I'd just actually like to, the captioning has dropped off, and I'm not sure if our writer can hear us. I'm not sure what's happening. So we do have a member of our committee who relies on captioning, and so with the council's indulgence and respect, I would hope that we could perhaps figure out why our captioning has dropped off. How do we get to there?
I just received an update. Our connection was disconnected through just technical difficulties. They are working on it right now and trying to get it back up.
Did they have any idea as to how long that would take? No. Certainly a degree of irony here in that our community can't fully participate in what's going on at this moment, including one of our members who's directly impacted by our intended actions today.
So our staff are on the phone with the captioners, and it's back? We're back. Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Armstrong.
Well, in any event, as I was talking about this park, it's not accessible. Even today, it's been there for many, many months. I brought it to council's attention as to, you know, why we shouldn't approve of it as a park. But council, that wasn't, obviously, I'm sure there were other reasons, but that should be a reason on its own. And it hasn't been brought up to current standards. And I'm not an expert on standards, but I know when a person cannot access in a park a place to sit and can't use any device to go into a park, that's a pretty blatant contravention of, I believe, provincial standards. So there's one example, and that's something I can just think of, and everybody was aware of that. But for political reasons,
Point of order.
excuse me, I have the chair.
Point of order.
A point of order supersedes. Go ahead, Your Worship.
I need the microphone yielded if I were to speak. Chair, I say this respectfully. We have a delegation that's before us presenting a very serious concern. We are in the midst of an election, and political reasons have just been raised in a debate. My concern is that Council Chambers is moving in the direction of supporting a political campaign one way or another. I'm neutral on that, but I'm calling a point of order because I'd really like us to focus on the concerns that are being brought forward by this delegation.
Councillor Armstrong, if you could focus on the concerns
Well,
that have been brought forward,
I'd
and I
very much
don't,
like to focus, I'm not quite sure what the election has to do with it, but first of all, I'm not currently a candidate, and the individuals I'm speaking to my knowledge, are not candidates. I don't think the mayor's a
the
candidate.
Accessibility Advisory Committee did not raise the issue of the park. So if you could stick to the
Well,
issues that they have raised.
I'm speaking to accessibility and why I believe this committee.
Just focus, Councillor.
these
That's all I'm asking you to do is
individuals-
focus, please.
I'm gonna focus. Again, why these individuals feel that their concerns have not been addressed. Their concerns and their concerns of their community have not been addressed. And I'm just focusing on one example that I'm aware of where their concerns of their community should have been addressed, people should have cared about and didn't. And that's just one example as a counselor that I'm aware of. And of course, just the other day, I was speaking with a member of your community, and some issues about transit were raised. And transit, quite often, issues about the performance of our LTC when it comes to paratransit issues, it's been raised with me a number of times. It's been ongoing. So the thing is, we use the word funding. Well, we've known the issues are there. We know how you deal with these issues, and it's more funding. You have to put the money in. And that hasn't happened. And I remember about the snow issue that, our standards were lowered, and I won't get into, what went on there, but it was all about the money. It was all about the money, not the level of the snow and how much easier it would make individuals to use sidewalks if, we kept a better standard. And spent the money, but it wasn't a priority. It wasn't a priority. So I don't know where we go from here, but I appreciate the mayor's going to make a motion, and we're gonna, hear what that motion is, whatever it is. But I really think that the city manager should, obviously we set policy, and he should be here. And I'm sure if he knew that this was going to happen, I'm sure he would have been here, so that he would have an opportunity on behalf of all his staff to address why policies weren't implemented, why recommendations weren't implemented, why directions of council haven't been followed with some diligence. And so I think that, this discussion, I think, should continue. I think the city manager should be asked to be here in order to address this on behalf of his staff as to why some of these things haven't been acted on or acted on in an appropriate time frame. And with the greatest of respect to the staff member that did step forward to suggest that things have been, happening. This is something that's been going on for a long time. And, for us to suggest that, last Friday we were having meetings on these issues, and I don't really know what those meetings were exactly. I think this is something that's gone on for a long time, not just, and I appreciate maybe we are trying to deal with it more quickly now, especially.
Speaking of long times, Councillor, you're coming up to your 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. I guess the thing is, last meeting that we had on this issue, concerns were raised. I expected today that we would be getting reports and some feedback about the issues that were raised last time the group was here. And so maybe that's not going to happen now. I don't know. But I think I'd really like to see the city manager here. I have some questions for him. And also, in any event, I'll leave it at that because I'm sure my 5 minutes are done.
Councillor Helmer?
I just want to clarify, because Councillor Armstrong has brought it up many times. The city manager is away, I believe on vacation, We got notice of that weeks ago that he's gonna be gone, and he's returning on June the 11th. So, not here.
Counselor, your 5 minutes is up. We will come back to you, but I'd like to move to Counselor Van Holst. He hasn't had a chance to speak yet. You're at your 5 minutes. We'll circle back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. Let me thank the advisory committee for their tremendous determination and commitment to their work. I have had contact by some of the Paris Transit drivers, and so I thought I'd just share a piece of information that might help us in working some of this out as well. Their concern is that when they get their schedules, they'll often be double and triple booked, so they might get 3 appointments for 2 o'clock instead of an appointment for 1:50, 2 p.m. and 2:10. And they also find that very frustrating because they're very committed to doing a good work. And I think you have some very conscientious drivers and helpful drivers, but this is also a challenge that they're facing. And that's frustrating for them too, because it means that someone has to wait much longer than they expected. So it's difficult for them to adjust that. That's my comment.
Thank you, Your Worship.
I wanted to bring forward a motion, if I could. Jerry has a copy of that. Actually, we were working on it back and forth through email, and it'll come up on screen, I think, when it's ready. But essentially, my initial comments before I present this motion, again, really focus on, I think, the constructive attitude that I think has been presented by many committee members and certainly by our delegation on how do we fix this moving forward. And so, before we get into things like finger pointing, before we get into comments about what staff did or didn't do, I think it's really important that I say, initially that I've been on council for almost 8 years. I'm the mayor of the City of London. I'm the CEO of the Corporation of the City of London. If anybody's responsible for this, it's me. And I think that some councillors have been on council for longer than that period of time, and some councillors have been on for shorter, but we are the governing body of this organization. And so I feel very strongly that it's us that are responsible, and I want to point that out. What I want to recommend is that we hold an initial meeting, and I'm happy to organize that at the direction of council. It would be a meeting with myself, with representatives from the ACC-AC, maybe the executive perhaps, and members of council who are willing to put their name forward, provided that we can steer clear of any issues that we have with quorum. And I'll use your words, make an honest effort, have an honest conversation about what we can do moving forward. And initially I thought a task force, but that seems too bureaucratic. And what I'd like to do is have an initial meeting within the next very short period of time. And part of the direction that I'm asking council to give me is to report back to this committee within 30 days. And we're not going to solve this issue within 30 days, but I think we can make some good progress. And I think that if we can come back together with some ideas about what we can do moving forward, then we can put together some action items and set up some strategies. But I really think that conversation needs to occur. And I don't think it's going to be a constructive one if we do it here today.
I'll go to Councillor Armstrong, and, Councillor Sully is indicating that he would like to second the mayor's motion. Go ahead, Councillor Armstrong.
Well, thank you, Ms. Presiding Officer. I guess the thing is that rather than make suggestions, I'd sort of like to hear from the advisory group. Where would you like to see us go from here? What would you recommend? Rather than us suggest, what direction would you like to? Because there's two ways to go here. You can continue with what how you feel and what you want to do, and that's fair enough. Or what would you like for us to do to sort of move things forward in the right direction? What would you like us to do?
Okay, we were just having a mini consultation back there about, so I think we went back and it was unanimously agreed by everybody back here that if you go through with this motion, that we are in favor of that and that we are willing to hold off on the resignations and meet with you and see how we can move forward positively. Thank you.
Okay, so meet with us, talk with us, see if we can resolve, get things back on track. Is that sort of, and are you happy with the mayor and any councillors that would make themselves available? Is that, or would you want anybody else included? Well, like the city manager.
I think we should make sure that Chantal is with us as well, who's the accessibility person from the city. She would be very helpful. And yeah, I mean, I think that the goal is to look at it and see how we can move forward, how we can try and ensure that things don't keep falling through the cracks, so that when we're presenting things, they're getting accepted, approved, and then they get lost. And so we have to somehow have a discussion of how we're going to not let that continue to happen, and that so that we feel that all the work that we're doing with all the expertise back here, since we are the ones that are appointed to be giving you advice on this as experts in the field, that it's somehow regarded by you. And we know you don't have to follow all the advice that we give, but we would like to know that we're being heard.
Councillor
Well,
Armstrong.
I'm going to support the motion with the addition of Chantal, but I would like the city manager to participate directly in this because unfortunately, some of these issues take some time to resolve, and I really think the administration, politicians may move on and there may be a change, and these meetings may continue, and obviously the issue is going to continue. I don't think this is going to get solved with a few meetings, but would you object to the city manager being directly involved?
I think the problem with the city manager being involved is if he's not back until June 11th, that our timeline is getting really short. And I'm new to understanding all of the order of everything, but from what I know, I think that we advise you, and then you go to council, and from there at council, you direct city staff. So I think our role is to deal with you, as I understand it. Correct me if I'm wrong. And
That's very succinct, Ms. Madden, thank you. Councillor, I'm going to go to Councillor Ridley now.
Thank you. I was just going to caution against adding bureaucratic layers by adding specific people. I think the intent of the motion is that we get the right people at the table and the people who are interested in working on this. So I think once we start naming specific people and then a meeting can't proceed because someone is away, it just is going to create a nightmare that we don't need. I think that the intent of the motion that's on the floor is very clear. I think that the committee is supportive of that, and we will ensure that we have the right people at the table for that discussion. So that's what I would be in support of.
Thank you, Councillor Ridley. Anybody else on committee have comments, questions, concerns? No. If there's no objection, I would like to make a few comments from the chair. So first of all, thank you very much for the delegation, and thank you for all of the members of the committee that came out today. I know that volunteering to serve on an advisory committee is a huge commitment of time and effort. And I hear your frustration, and I understand it, and I apologize for that. As the mayor said, it's the responsibility stops with us. We have a collective responsibility as council to make sure that we're not wasting your time. And I'm glad you pointed out that not all advice will always be followed, but you are that is your role, to advise us, especially in areas of accessibility and the legislation as well that goes along with accessibility. I believe mistakes that this council has made in the past, one of which that you've pointed out in your list, I think that's a result of our not having really true dedicated experts in AODA legislation, for example. And so that's, if we don't have that on staff or on council, then we should be paying very close attention to you when you advise us on things like that. Many councillors have pointed out the low-hanging fruit, and that we never even went for the low-hanging fruit on your list, and beginning meetings by listing the available supports and services for people with challenges. That is so easy to do. And personally, I make a commitment going forward to find out what those supports are, and to do that at the beginning of every community and protective services meeting that I chair. I have a question for you. It's my understanding that we must have an advisory committee advising us on accessibility issues. Is that correct? And is that under the AODA legislation?
Yep, the answer is yes. And yes, you're mandated by law to have an accessibility advisory committee.
Thank you. So we do have many advisory committees, but this is one of the few that we actually are required to have. And so it would be a very bad thing for this council to be in violation and not have an accessibility advisory committee even for a short time. As you pointed out, 1 in 7 Londoners live with a disability, and you have said in the past before us that the number's growing because we have an aging population, and especially in London, I believe our population is aging faster than the provincial average. So this is something that probably does affect all of us, and if it doesn't right now, it soon will. I know what happens when, for example, your committee comes before us and we make a motion based on something you've recommended. I believe you get a letter that says this is the motion that was passed at council. I hope when the mayor meets with you, or whatever recommendations the mayor ends up making to council, we find some way to go beyond that. So saying that we passed this motion at council, for example, changing the name of the award on the mayor's New Year's honors list, finding a way to say when the direction has been followed, not just here's a letter that says we gave this direction. We want to know when the item's been checked off and completed. So I'm saying that out loud, and hopefully that's something that we can find a way to do. And in response to Councillor Ridley's earlier question about part of our motion, the last time you were before us, it was about reviewing past agendas, having staff review past agendas to see if there are any other items that are still out there hanging that haven't been completed or reported back in any way. So again, thank you very much for coming. I apologize for the frustration that you feel and for the lack of action. And I'm hoping that what you've heard today tells you that we do care and we want to do things differently. And I'm looking forward to the changes that we can make. Thank you. Your worship, go ahead.
Just should this motion pass, I kept it a little on the vague side and not prescriptive to provide some flexibility and some nimbleness because of that 30-day timeline. But my intention is, if it passes here and through council, then to reach out to council members, anyone that wants to be involved in this process between now and completion, then we'll do that. Of course, recognizing that we can't have a quorum of any committee.
Any other comments? Okay, we have a motion on the floor. It's been moved by Mayor Brown and seconded by Councillor Sali. If you don't see the motion, you can click on current item and refresh your screen. And I believe we can call the vote. So this is the mayor's motion, and there's also a subsequent motion that you'll see on your screen once we vote on this, once we report out.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So the clerk has prepared another motion, which is receiving the delegation, and also, if you look, it says endorse the leading priorities, the identified areas in the ACAC report and endorsing them as leading priorities and actions to be undertaken to support accessibility. Should I read out the motion? I'll read out the motion. Yeah, and this is to deal with the whole ACAC report. So that the following actions be taken with respect to the fourth report of the Accessibility Advisory Committee from its meeting held on April 26th, 2018. A, the top asks in each of the three key identified areas, transportation, employment, infrastructure, contained in the Education and Awareness Subcommittee report, as appended to the agenda, be endorsed by Municipal Council as leading priorities and actions to be undertaken to support accessibility. It being noted that 5 community open house events identified these 3 key areas of deficiency as barriers to accessibility. B, that the following actions be taken with respect to the communication dated March 24th, 2018 from S. Connors with respect to improving accessibility. 1, the civic administration be encouraged to include designated scooter/wheelchair charging stations in any new municipal buildings or significant renovations to municipal buildings, as well as including this concept in the next revision to the facility accessibility design standards, FADS. And 2, the City of London Accessible Customer Service Training be amended to include a process for accommodating requests for charging scooters/wheelchairs at existing municipal facilities. C, the manager, special events, community rentals, or designate be requested to provide an update regarding the status of the outdoor event guide. And D, clauses 1.1, 3.1 to 3.6, 5.1 and 5.2 be received, it being noted that the attached presentation from J. Madden, M. Dawthorne, M. Cairns, A. Forrest, J. Menard, P. Moore, N. Judges, L. Chappelle, and K. Hussein was received with respect to this matter. Councillor Sully.
I'm just indicating I'll move it if that's what was needed.
Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Helmer?
I just want to be really clear that, I think this is the motion to endorse these things as leading priorities. I think this is going to get us into the same situation we've been in before, where things happen here, but then where does it go? And I know that's the recommendation from the advisory committee. I know everyone wants to be really responsive to the recommendations of the advisory committees that they're bringing forward. But I think that a more specific plan of action is needed for a bunch of these things. And this is not going to necessarily stop that from happening, which is what I think will actually be more effective. So I don't think we need to not do it, but I don't want people to think this is all we need to do. And then all of a sudden we're going to have progress happening on a bunch of these fronts, because there's a lot of things that will need to happen at the Transit Commission specifically, for example, that we can say whatever we want here at City Council and it's not necessarily going to change anything over at the Transit Commission. So I just want to be clear about expectations and what's next in this particular motion, because I do support these things as top priorities coming out of the open house, and I think we need to make progress on those fronts. But it's going to require all kinds of other motions and different times and a whole action plan for how to do that I hope will come out of the discussion that we have next, that we already passed.
I'm wondering, since we have it's identified in the motion in Part A, that these are actions to be undertaken to support accessibility. I hear what you're saying, Councillor Helmer, that these aren't the only actions, and perhaps more things will be identified not only through the process that the mayor has started with his motion, but also just going forward. And would we amend the motion to endorse them as leading priorities, but not necessarily include the line actions to be undertaken? Or I think the first step is that we identify them as priorities. Do we say that these are the actions we're going to take right now when we have this other process started with the mayor, which may identify these actions, more actions, different actions? Councillor Ridley.
Madam Chair, and to my colleague, Councillor Helmer, thank you, Councillor Helmer, for identifying this. I was struggling with it myself as the motion was coming up. If I can make a suggestion on some language change, I think after, on Part A, be endorsed and referred to the discussion as noted in the previous motion for further implementation strategies, some kind of language like that. So saying that you guys have made these recommendations. We like that they came from the community group. We think that they're good recommendations, but let's take them to that discussion table to talk about how we would implement them. Does that seem reasonable? Okay, I'm seeing verbal consent back there, so that's my recommendation. I think there's already a mover, but I think that would help resolve the issue at hand.
Yeah, Councillor Sully has indicated he would move that. Would you second that, Councillor Ridley? Okay, Councillor Ridley is moving it, and Councillor Sully is seconding that motion. If you refresh your screen, you'll see the revised motion. Any other comments? Okay, we are good, and so I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you again for coming. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, I'm going to circle back to the consent items, and I'm wondering if anyone would like to pull any of the consent items. Okay, I'm not, oh, Councillor Armstrong, do you want to pull or just want to make a comment on?
Well, just a quick question to staff, and that was.
Okay, so hold on one second. Let's put all the consent items on the floor, and Mayor Brown is moving it. Councillor Sully is seconding it. And Councillor Ridley had indicated that she wants to make a comment first. Councillor Armstrong, so go ahead, Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On item 2.3, I'm glad to see us closing the loop on this one and moving forward with it. I think it's a very simple change. It's in regards to the pet boarding, pet sitting policy. I think this will be more consistent with our existing framework and allow a little bit of flexibility to Londoners. In regards to the naming of the Southwest Community Center, this is very exciting and just another sign that we are almost open for swimming and skating and reading and all of the good things that the people of Southwest London have been looking forward to for a very long time to have right in their own community. So glad to see that as well.
Thank you, Councillor Ridley. Councillor Armstrong.
Just on 2.2, and that was to do with naming of a permanent site for Vimy Ridge Park. I just threw you to staff. Looking on page 10, there's the list draft site selection criteria, and I went through that criteria, and I'm just wondering if one of the criteria, does staff feel that the site being close to other facilities or sites that might be, we'll call it compatible, whether that should be part of the criteria as well? Just a yes or no, and can that be included in there, even if it may not be relevant or to a degree, whatever?
Go ahead, Mr. McPherson.
Sure, through the chair. That's a good question. Perhaps the text here isn't as clear as it should be. Under monument potential, we do have relevancy to site and context, because you're right, in some of these locations, some of them are grouped within areas that have other veterans-related memorials. So that's the general intent of that. We can make that clearer.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking so much on the memorial side, like being near other memorials, but being near other compatible sites. Yeah, museums or exhibition sites of whatever nature, military or otherwise. So yeah, if that's what that sort of meant, it's all encompassing, then I'm good with that. I just wanted to be clear on it. Thank you.
Councillor Helmer.
About 2.4, this is the licensed childcare affordability pilot. That obviously looks to be extremely good news for families in London. I wonder if our staff could just speak to the impact, especially in terms of the affordability for families. You were talking about $150 per child per month, and this pilot's running for 7 months. So that seems like a very significant benefit for families. And I just wonder if staff could speak to it.
Through the chair, yes, we're quite happy to speak to the details of the pilot. So this is in response to a provincial direction regarding an expansion program for childcare across the province. It is meant to address and improve affordability and accessibility for families accessing childcare in all communities. So it's meant to be available to try and improve that situation for everyone who is accessing licensed childcare, be it a center or a home childcare setting. The funding is one time and time limited. So we worked with our community to identify priorities that we might be able to use this money effectively and not have to return any back to the province. So you'll see in the report that we have 6 aspects to this. In terms of impacts for families and outcomes for families, that happens in a number of ways. One, the councillor has already identified the savings per month for families through a reduction and receiving money in return on the rate that they're paying. But it also has an impact for families in terms of the quality of the centers and home childcare settings, and that happens in a couple of ways. One, we're providing funding to operators to do repairs, to improve play equipment, so that addresses quality, as well as capacity building for special projects where we might be able to enhance some training around pedagogy and other aspects that improve technology and those kinds of things. I would also just like to highlight that we've put some funding towards special needs resourcing. We know there are a number of families who have children with special needs, and this is to be able to enhance their participation in licensed childcare, and finally, relocation of centers. So those are the many ways that actually will offer some improvement in accessibility and in affordability for families.
Thank you. So just to follow up, I realize there's all these different ways that it looks like it's $10.3 million that's being expended. For a family that's got one kid in childcare for the full 7 months, we're looking at over $1,000 in savings, and if they had 2 kids, it'd be $2,100. So, you know, I think that is obviously really welcome news. The cost of childcare obviously is high, and it's something that a lot of families struggle with. I know this is just one-time funding, but it seems like a very good use across all the different aspects, not just the affordability, the direct savings, but the other things that Ms. Livingston was just talking about. I'm glad to see that, and then it's fully provincially funded, which is also great.
Okay, no, I'm not seeing any other comments, so we have all of the consent items on the floor, do we? Okay, so we'll open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, moving on to item 3.2, we have a delegation from Ms. Lystar, Patricia Lystar of the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. Thank you. Welcome, and you have 5 minutes for your delegation.
Sure. Just thank you for allowing me the opportunity to represent AWAC and speak with you today. I'd like to just take a few minutes to go through some of the reasonings behind our recommendation put forth in your agenda today. Exotic animals, which are often featured as part of mobile live animal programs, in their headlines, harbor diseases that can be spread to humans. The Ontario Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care recommends children under the age of 5 should not visit facilities with exotic animals. Aside from the risk of disease, there are also risks of personal injury due to bites with or without poisonous venom, claws, and constriction from large snakes. There is no oversight nor standard set by the province regarding the health and safety practices or permits requiring regular inspection, leaving the burden of managing any and all health and safety related issues entirely at the municipal level. Many animals are subject to conditions where their biological, behavioral, and social needs are not met. All animals require space to engage in normal movements and behaviors and appropriate environmental conditions. For most mobile live animal programs, these exotic species are transported from the time they leave their home base until they return in extremely minimalist conditions. Mammals and birds tend to be confined and moved in cages or crates, while reptiles and amphibians are routinely moved in plastic tubs and containers, often with so little space that they're unable to move normally or even turn around. Additionally, they are subjected to environmental concerns, vibrations, sounds, light, lack thereof light, during the transportation process and while at a venue. Most exotic animals die long before reaching what would be considered a natural lifespan, and more than 75% of reptiles die within 24 months of being purchased. As there is no current oversight, anyone, including any of you or myself even, could open and operate a mobile live animal program using Class 7 animals within the city under present bylaw exemptions. Municipal staff do not have the expertise or capacity to provide oversight to these issues that come with the keeping of exotic wild animals or their husbandry. After careful study and deliberation, the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee asks that you support this important bylaw recommendation for an amendment, keeping in mind that it only applies to species that have already been deemed dangerous for health or safety reasons, and these programs would still be welcome with animals which are currently allowed in the city.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Armstrong?
I guess it would be question time. Yes, I don't have any questions. I support this, so I'll be happy to move whatever appropriate direction at the appropriate time.
Councillor Sully.
Thank you for coming in and all you guys for your work and effort. Happy to support this as well. I think I had some opportunity to speak to you guys offline as well, so you guys have made me well informed, so much appreciated and happy to support the motion.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure what my colleagues are supporting, to be honest. If they're supporting the request of the delegate or the revised bylaw as provided to us in an advisory committee report, because that's what's on the floor right now. So what I would be interested in supporting is sending this to our staff to review and report back. I think that's the appropriate way to make any bylaw change. And I'm sure that our staff have some comments on it. And so that's what I would be prepared to support. I do thank the delegate, but I also want to note that we have 2 more delegations on our list, and I'm assuming that they're wishing to delegate on the same thing. So if they are going to say the same things, I hope that they can keep their delegations brief, and if they have different information, I would also like to hear from them first. I just wanted to caution people before we got too far down the path of making bylaw changes in 5 minutes or less here on the floor, so.
Yes, Councillor, and I saw those 2 other delegation requests. I was interested to see where the committee wanted to go with the recommendation from the advisory committee. If we are referring this back to staff, it may be appropriate to hear those delegations when the staff report back, or it may be appropriate to hear the delegations today. It's up to committee. Councillor Armstrong?
I think perhaps when they report back, and if we're sending it to staff for that reason, the delegations may not even want, unless they have something different, they may not even want to present, but that's up to them.
Your worship, go ahead.
I think some really important points have been raised, but I also recognize that a couple of Londoners have made the effort to be here today, and so it would be my preference if we would leave it up to them.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. I have always supported delegations. I'd be fine with hearing them today. I think we'll spend more time talking about whether or not to hear them. But I did want to check with staff first about bylaw changes and a bylaw change like this. What would that look like? When would we get a report back? Would there be a public participation meeting? Just to get that information before we make a decision on how to proceed, I think would be helpful.
Through the chair, yes, typically something like this would be referred back to staff. Staff would consult with the industry and likely report back. With that report back, we typically don't bring back a bylaw at that time. Typically we'll report back with and seek direction from council to hold a PPM, public participation meeting, and then make the necessary bylaw amendments at that time, because it does require a public process.
Thank you. I thought that was the process, and thank you for the reminder. So the mayor is quite right. I mean, we do have individuals who are here and who have indicated an interest in delegation. I would urge them to wait till we have the reports so they could delegate on the information to contact staff. So sorry, the report would come back and then a PPM would follow. So I think that would be the time to kind of make your delegation based on the information that's going to be presented and considered by council. I think at this time, what you need to keep in mind is what we're considering is whether or not to send this to staff. So if the delegation is on whether or not we should send it to staff, I'd be happy to hear that. It would help me to make a decision. But if it's on the content of potential changes, I think the right time would be after the staff report is received.
So what the councillor is asking is, basically, if the content of your delegation is similar to what Ms. Lystar has already presented, then since this is being referred back to staff, it may be moot to hear more of the same information. If you want to do a delegation based on whether or not we do refer this back to staff, but staff have just advised what the procedure is, and we must hold, if we're going to change a bylaw, we must hold a public participation meeting. So that's a step that has to take place. We can't just direct staff to change the bylaw today and then it's over and done with. There has to be public consultation and a public participation meeting. So do you want to move? Okay, so Councillor Ridley is moving that we grant delegation status today, and the mayor is seconding that. All in favor? Any opposed? We don't have to do it online. So go ahead, Ms. Van Linden, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. All that I wanted to say is if your decision is going to be to refer it back to staff, then I'm very happy to wait, to hold my delegation until that time, if that's the decision you're making. So
it's not a one-time only thing, so
Yeah, okay.
you can come back and ask for a repeat delegation. And Mr. Laidlaw?
I agree with you that it would be moot at this point. So if you're making a recommendation to staff, then I would prefer to come back and provide commentary to inform the deliberations at that time.
Thank you. I have a question for staff. Sorry, from the chair. Mr. Kotsifas, you said that you would consult with industry. Would the consultation also include our advisory committee?
Through the chair, yes, and we've noted the individuals on record here, and we would be having conversations with them as well.
Thank you very much. So we have a motion to refer this back to staff. Just that portion 4.1 of the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee report. The mayor is seconding that motion. So there are some additional, it's more than just a referral, it's receiving the report, but also if you'll look at the motion on the screen and the mover and seconder can let me know if they're okay with that. Okay, we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Any other comments? No, then we can open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So we'll move on to item 3.3, and we have another delegation that we're going to hear. So we have Tristan Knott coming to speak about naloxone kits at city-owned AED machines. If you could say that into the microphone so we have it on the live stream.
Hello, everyone. As was stated, my name is Tristan Nault. I'm here on behalf of the Political Advocacy Committee at Schulich to speak to you about our proposal to put naloxone kits at AED machines. I'd like to first just start off by thanking you folks for the opportunity to speak in front of you, and thank the various members of the gallery that have come out in support, actually, of this initiative. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca Barnfield, who's here to speak as well.
So I know that a number of people in the audience here are very well versed regarding the opioid crisis that is occurring across Canada, but also in London, Ontario. And as medical students, there are a number of statistics that really speak to us, and those are the ones relating to hospitalization and death. So in 2017, 30.4 hospitalizations per total 100,000 hospitalizations were related to opioid poisoning in London. Now, this is higher than in Toronto and Ottawa. It's higher than the Ontario average, which on the graph here on the slide is shown in red. And in fact, it's the second highest rate in Canada. As well, from 2011 to 2016, there was an increase in opioid-related hospitalization, and you can see that as the green line on this graph from Middlesex London Health Unit. And you can see that it's been consistently above the Ontario rate, and it's also increasing. There's been an increasing number of emergency room visits and deaths due to opioid poisoning in London. Additionally, fentanyl and carfentanil, which are both really potent, really strong opioid preparations, have been found in street drugs in London. And we've seen that 23 drug seizures by police have had fentanyl, and 2 have had carfentanil. And this is a very potent drug, and 2 milligrams or 2 grains of sand can cause a fatal overdose. So we wanted to speak about what naloxone is, and effectively, it's like an antidote to an opioid overdose or poisoning. And instead of just stopping the overdose or poisoning, it actually reverses the effects. Now, an opioid poisoning is fatal due to its effect on the person's ability to breathe, and what naloxone does is actually return the person to being able to breathe on their own. Importantly, it's also important to note that there is no negative effect of using naloxone on a person that you encounter that has not used opioids. So for members of the public that would be using naloxone, they don't need to have medical training to be able to know when to use it. As well, there are injectable and inhalable formulations. So the injectable is a lot like an EpiPen, and the inhalable formulation is a lot like a nasal spray that many people have used before.
And just to follow up on the nasal spray aspect, I believe we've passed around a couple kits so we can take a look for ourselves and see how benign and I guess easy to use and user-friendly that those kits can be. So the long and short of it is that we're here to try and get 2 naloxone kits at each current AED machine on city-owned and operated properties. We've learned that there's 53 of these such AED machines in London, and the math works out at $107 currently per kit to around $11,500 to see this into fruition. Additionally, we'd like to have naloxone administration training for the staff at these facilities, something that we've been in discussions with the Middlesex London Health Unit about providing and doing when the time comes. We'd like appropriate signage to be put up so that people are able to, understand and realize that naloxone is available at these AED machines. And then crucially, we'd like some town hall sessions to be provided before, during, and after this implementation to increase public awareness about naloxone, how to use it, where you can find it, and in general, just to promote harm reduction as something that's in the public consciousness. And additionally, we would like sort of an institution like the city to take on this project, because longitudinal quantitative follow-up and sort of tracking of this data of who's using it and where it's being used is very important to us as part of this procedure. So we've already got support from various city councilors and even some councilors that sit on this very committee. As I said, we've collaborated and talked to the Middlesex London Health Unit. We've had meetings with the London Public Library Board, who seems to be very supportive of this initiative as well and would be interested in collaborating going forward with the city. And lastly, we also have members from the London Youth Advisory Committee who we've met with and are actually in attendance right now, supportive of this initiative as well. So with that, I'd like to open the floor up to some questions.
Thank you. Thanks very much for your delegation. I'll go to Councillor Sully.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for coming in and presenting. I don't actually have any questions because I did have an opportunity to meet with their team beforehand at a previous meeting, and I'm just prepared to move a motion. I know Councillor Squire was working with them as well and had some language prepared, and I know the mayor has indicated that he's willing to second that as well. So just let me know when is the appropriate time.
So for committee members that may not have seen it, Councillor Squire's letter is in the added agenda package. And it's up on the screen as well. Councillor Armstrong.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the group for doing the work on this. We much appreciate it, and I'm sure someday, well, hopefully not, but maybe someday, you know, somebody will appreciate the work that you've done on this, and a life will be saved. And certainly, I think it's a good idea to be proactive and have things in place in the community that can deal with emergencies. And that's why we have defibrillators in public buildings and so on. And obviously our police and fire are equipped, and ambulance are equipped with defibrillators and so on. I'm not sure where the police are acting. I'm not sure if, whether they have this product with them or not, where they're at on that. Do you know right now what the police are doing on this issue?
Yeah, I do believe that as of recently, the police services are carrying naloxone with them, so they have it.
The only other thought I'd have on the issue is, and I don't know if this will have to be referred to administration for report back or not, but is there any other places in our community that this should be available? Had you any thoughts on that? Like I'm thinking, for an example, large public events. Now I know police, fire, ambulance may not have this, but is there any other circumstances you can think of?
Yeah, so I think part of the reason why we wanted to come to the city with this proposal first is that we think that the city is in a position to set an example for the greater community. There are AED machines and other places that we can put these around the community. And we think that having a kind of endorsement for the harm reduction principles, that the city would be kind of saying, yeah, we support this. If we were to move forward from the city's perspective, I think that would be huge in terms of encouraging other community groups. Like we said, we've met with the libraries, for instance. They have 16 locations that they were currently in internal talks about what they wanted to do with regards to this information that we had presented to them as well. And I think they would very much be interested in collaborating and potentially getting some of the costs down in ordering in bulk, different things like that. As well, I think there's tremendous potential to get you know, with the help of the Youth Advisory Committee in particular, there's tremendous potential to try and move on getting places like campuses like Western or Fanshawe equipped with these with this drug, and I think the possibilities are almost limitless, to be honest.
Well, yeah, that would be great to see. I think Fanshawe, UWO, Western Fair. I mean, I can think of a lot of places, boards and commissions. So perhaps that's all part of this. You know, we support this, but if there's an opportunity for us to partner and provide, you know, reduce costs in any way through training or education or whatever the case may be, that we should reach out to everyone on this issue. Because I remember the day when the argument was made about putting defibrillators out in the community on fire trucks, and that happened. And then the discussion opened, well, why not in buildings? And of course, then that happened. And it was only this weekend I was visiting a club that, and they showed me they had just installed, and this is a small ethnic club, and they had just installed a defibrillator. And so I thought, wow, things have really changed over so many years that now what was something that was expensive involved a lot of training, etc. And now it's just, you know, it's just a common day thing to find a defibrillator in most public and even private not-for-profit buildings. So so I could see how we should, you know, take a leading role not only in having it in our facilities, but encouraging others, agencies, boards, and even employers to have it on site. So thank you for the work again, what you've done on this.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, my colleagues have provided some great comments. I actually did still have questions. Why 2? I took a look at your kit. It looks like there's 2 doses in the kit and you're asking for 2 kits per site. Can you explain your rationale?
So part of the reason why we settled on that number is because that was this entire proposal in part comes from a similar proposal that was implemented in Kingston in fall of 2017. They actually took, and we have copies of the bill we would be happy to provide, but they took a similar proposition to council, and the vote passed unanimously to get 2 naloxone kits with 2 doses in each of them at their AED locations. So in terms of the naloxone's efficacy in response to opioid poisonings, it's not necessarily the case that 1 dose is going to be enough. So in that situation, the thinking is that having more doses present is going to increase the chances that EMS and first responders are able to get to the scene and do some more, I guess, definitive medical management with respect to these patients and these people who are having opioid poisoning events. So that's kind of the logic behind having the 4 doses at a given AED machine.
Thank you. I hear what you're saying there. As I was just trying to think of, you know, the frequency of replacement and the number of doses needed. So you're saying it could need up to 4 doses between the time that an overdose emergency was identified and EMS could arrive. Is that your thought there?
Yeah, and I think with respect to what you're saying with regards to the frequency of use, that's something that we're extremely interested in tracking longitudinally, and that's why we want this to be sort of institutionalized and want this to be a project that the city takes on. I think that was kind of one of the bigger differences between the proposal that sort of came out of Kingston versus what we're putting on the table here. I think there needs to be an emphasis on tracking, and even in our discussions with the library board, they identified that they have some statistics from in-house incidents that occur in their bathrooms and their public spaces. And I think having that data available to us, and I guess, you know, if it's 4 kits at a given AED machine because we're identifying increased traffic, then, you know, so be it. But I think there needs to sort of be a minimum threshold that we're able to meet if we're going to roll this out properly.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. In the motion that Councillor Squire has prepared for us, it doesn't actually include anything about a partnership or tracking. Is that something that should be considered? I know you're representing your class at Schulich, but is that a formal partnership that the school would like to make for that study, or is there another recommended partner?
So yeah, as you point out, we're here on behalf of a student interest group and not necessarily in a position to take on a longitudinal partnership on a project like this. And I think there's definitely some utility in sort of institutionalizing this and having this be something that the city looks after longitudinally. With that being said, with respect to educational materials, public relation events, designing of the signage that's going to be necessary, we're certainly not going away. And we would be happy to be in touch and collaborate on efforts like that. But I think in terms of the data tracking and I guess the reporting of, what's being used where and different things like that, I think that should be something that is institutionalized and something that the city would be able to take on, hopefully.
And then my last question for you, and then I'll have some comments from my colleagues, is the funding for the kits. Is there also a provincial funding? Like I thought I understood at one point they could go to the pharmacy, be trained, and it would be provided, and that was funded through the Ministry of Health. So I don't know if you know that information, if funding to kits at AEDs would also be available through the ministry, or would it have to be a private funding? And if you don't know, that's okay. Our staff could report back on that.
So you're correct. So individuals such as myself and Rebecca can and have gone to get our free naloxone kits at various pharmacies that where those are available. However, based on the only precedent that we have, which is the city of Kingston, the kits do still have to be purchased on a larger scale like this. However, I pointed this out at a meeting with the library board. There's nothing stopping everybody in this room from going to get a kit themselves and then happening to find them back at City Hall at some point. With that being said, the prices of these naloxone kits actually dropped dramatically in the span of time that we were doing our research on this project and putting this project together. I believe they were retailing at closer to $150 at the time that we were starting to write our paper, so thinking around the start of 2018. However, before we hit the presses with our paper, which we would of course also be happy to send to all of you folks, the price had dropped to, as I said, $107. And we kind of mentioned the overall availability and prevalence of naloxone in the community. There is, I guess, increasing accessibility towards finding it and towards getting it. So with that being said, I can't speak to what's going to happen in the future, but I can only imagine that they might further be decreasing in price and that there might be more availability for the community.
Thank you, and thank you for entertaining all of my questions. We didn't have an opportunity to meet, and I would have liked to, because I would have probably asked those same questions. So thank you for entertaining me here at committee. I think that getting a report back, so the motion that Councillor Squire is looking to have passed in his absence, I think is appropriate. But I think that we should be adding to it to connect with some of our partners. We have a partner with the Middlesex London Health Unit that may be an appropriate place to actually gather some of that data or use some of that data. I think that not assigning this to the health unit, but certainly having our staff connect with them and see what role they do or don't want to play in that would be important. So I would suggest that amendment, that we outreach to partners to look at what portion of the data collection portion of this they would like to participate in. I think there are people that are better versed and better equipped to do that, and probably the better holder of that statistical information than the City of London, to be honest.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to our guests. I want to thank you for providing us with such a well-articulated, achievable, and uncomplicated request. I also want to point out, and Madam Chair, I think you recall being at the very first meeting of the Community Drug and Alcohol Strategy with me, but as Council's representative, I'm happy to report that we are just at our last meeting deciding on the final action items. We've got the recommendations from from the community, and I'll just read here the ones related to naloxone. So and these are the harm reduction recommendations where we want to work collaboratively to address the opioid crisis with Middlesex, London. And it's saying we should advocate for provision of naloxone kits, information and training to anyone being treated for an overdose at point of care or other access points. Support organizations to have naloxone available as standard first aid measure, and support that with policies and procedures, which is essentially what's being asked here. And also explore and remove barriers that prevent naloxone being used, which is, again, I think one of the reasons they've said they came to the city, because our action in this regard will have that effect as well. So thank you very much. It's lining up very well with what the broader community hopes to deal with this crisis as well. So thank you.
Your Worship.
Thanks very much, Chair. I want to thank the delegation for coming forward, for all of the people for coming to council, to this committee today to bring this idea forward. I mean, it really is, to me, the next logical step for us to take. And it is such a surprise that it's such a simple step and a relatively inexpensive step for us to take as well. I just want to remind committee members and through you, Chair, to the delegation, that we were the first community in Ontario to implement a temporary overdose prevention site. And that's something that we're all very proud of. And the opioid working group, led by Dr. Chris Mackey, just pulled out all the stops, working with the community. The province also stepped up and made that happen. To put that into just tangible figures, about 50 people are using that site a day. And since February, at least 5 lives have been saved using naloxone. 2 of those lives were saved today. And it is intervention that is easily accessible. It's a first aid intervention. I'm sure that it requires professional medical care immediately afterwards, but this could buy the time that that community member needs so that their life can be saved. And so as we work towards introducing harm reduction strategies in our community, I think that I appreciate the motion that Councillor Squire brought forward, and I'm happy to second it. And to the idea of moving forward with a more comprehensive implementation strategy, I think some of that will come from the report back, but you know, I just jotted down a little bit of language that you might want to consider, and that is to invite the opioid working group to participate in the design, implementation, and tracking of the program that's brought forward. I'm sure that you'll come up with similar or at least as appropriate language as well. But I think that you know, you should be lauded for coming forward, and your supporters should be recognized as well. Thank you for bringing this forward.
Councillor Helmer.
Okay, so all the really positive comments have been made, and now you got me. So first I want to say the naloxone program that the health unit's running in collaboration with people is really important. Making sure that naloxone is available if people are going to overdose is extremely important. That being said, I'm not sure about your idea. So I have a couple of questions. I think during your presentation, you were talking about there being no sort of medical issues with administering naloxone. I wonder if you could speak specifically to the kind of experience people will go through when a naloxone is administered, either injected or nasally, and especially what happens if somebody is not actually having an overdose event and somebody administers naloxone to them by mistake.
So I'll start by answering your question about what happens if you administer naloxone to somebody that's not actually having an opioid overdose. And I did try to touch on it earlier, but basically there is no negative effect if somebody is not having an opioid overdose. It's relatively benign. Now, if somebody is having an opioid overdose, one of the main, I guess, drawbacks would be that it can precipitate withdrawal from opioids. So it's important that if you are administering naloxone to somebody, that EMS or paramedics have been called and that they will be receiving medical treatment afterwards.
Okay, so first I'm going to say I'm not a doctor, and you should get your advice from people who really know what they're talking about. But administering naloxone and coming back from an overdose is a really awful experience. It's much better than dying, but it's not fun. And there are some issues that can come about from administering naloxone. So it can elevate your heart rate, it can cause tachycardia, there's all kinds of things that can happen. And you have to be trained in terms of how to actually help somebody with naloxone. So you want to, for example, make sure that they're having an overdose, and there's signs that you can look for to tell you whether they are. And you don't want to administer to people who are not having an overdose. After you've administered it, if it seems to be working, you want to put people in the recovery persistence. There's just basic things that people need to know. So it's not even as easy as using an AED. Like that is actually, I think, a bit easier in some ways. And this was one of the reasons why, widespread usage of naloxone was not, it's been around for quite a while, and it wasn't very widely used because even EMS, their approach to administering it was quite restrictive. So they want to make sure exactly what's going on before they would use something like naloxone. I do think it's helpful to have it more widespread, and I think it's important to be promoting the use and making sure that drug users in particular and people who are with drug users have access to it and are trained on how to recognize the signs and administer it effectively. It also has an expiration date, like it has a shelf life, like a lot of other drugs. And my understanding is that it's between 18 months and 2 years. And this is my main concern with what you're proposing. So I think the cost now is around $110. It's coming down, and it probably will go down even more over time. I'm not sure how many overdose events are actually happening in the vicinity of AED machines in city-owned unoperated facilities. I know why the AED machines are in those locations, because cardiac events do happen in those locations, and there's reason why they're located there. I'm not sure if overdoses are actually happening there. I've never seen that in any of the evidence. I'm not saying that they are or aren't, I just don't know. And I'm concerned about putting 2 double doses in places where they might never be used and would just expire, when they could be somewhere else. And where the training might go further. So I'm not against the idea. I just think that we need to think through what the efficacy will be. I think we can get that in the report back. And I think some of the expertise from folks at the health unit and others who have been involved in the administration of naloxone will be helpful in that regard. I think it's really great that you're working on this issue, because it's not like we're wasting a lot of money installing these everywhere. Even if one was used and resulted in overdose death reversal, that would be really great use of money, and I would support it. But I do want to think through whether it's going to work and if that's really the place where we want to be putting them. And I'm a little skeptical about the town hall part in particular, whether that's really the best way of informing people about it and getting them up to speed on it. But that can be worked out through the whole process, and I don't think we need to change what's being suggested here. Thanks very much for your advocacy.
So I think you make a number of really great points there. First of all, I'd love to agree with you. We are not doctors either. Hopefully we'll be 50% in a couple weeks after we finished our exams. But anyways, so you brought up a number of different points that I'd like to try and touch on here. So first of all, with respects to training, that's definitely a key part of our proposal here, and that was a big part of the Kingston proposal and the Kingston model. There were protections written in from liabilities for the city employees that would be able to use these kits, and there was training provided to them on how to do so, how to recognize an opioid poisoning event. And I guess one other thing I'd just like to point out, again, in the absence of an opioid poisoning event, there is no known drawback to using the naloxone. So even if that person was unconscious for a different reason and we gave them a shot anyways, that's not gonna, worsen their condition or anything like that. So training was a big important part there. I think then the other thing is that with respect to this public rollout, and we don't know what that looks like, and we're here to, talk about that, and we're happy to collaborate and see what that is going to ultimately look like. When we were speaking with the London Youth Advisory Committee, there was some talk about bringing that into their 101 day as part of a bigger event, or perhaps it could be a longitudinal thing where there could be events held at community centers, particularly in places where we see maybe higher a higher rate of needle discarding and things like this. So I do think we can and should be targeted in our approach and our use of these resources, because while we recognize that we may only be asking in this initial proposal for $11,500 of a $1 billion city budget, we do recognize that we want to use that as effectively as we can, and I think that would kind of speak to the need for longer term follow-up and longer tracking of where these kits are and aren't being used. And I guess the last point I'd like to make is a point that's been made a few different times by the Canadian Mental Health Association, and that's that there's no rhyme or reason to where people are having these opioid poisonings. And so I guess with regards to your question or just point about the utility of putting these next to within AED machines, the first pillar of that utility, I suppose, is the actual physical presence of the drug, and the public knowledge that even if even if my friend here isn't having an opioid poisoning event in that building, I think I can, come from Victoria Park to City Hall, or come from, from proximal locations. And I think that's even happened with an AED machine once before. So I think it's, first of all, the proximity of the actual drug. And then secondly, through the engagement and through the city setting an example of, harm reduction is something that we can and should be talking about. It's this opioid crisis is affecting our community disproportionately, and this is something that has to be a part of our public conversations. And I think that by putting naloxone at these AED machines, it sort of says, like a cardiac arrest, opioid poisonings can and are happening to everybody from all walks of society. And this isn't just a them issue, this is an us issue, and this is an issue that's affecting our entire community. So I think that that's what we can accomplish by putting them at these locations. And I certainly acknowledge that there's room to refine that approach, especially as we can kind of see where they're being used more and less as we go forward.
Okay, I'm looking to committee. Any other comments? Councillor Van Holst?
We were talking about not being doctors, and I did see Dr. Mackey was up here recently. He is there, and I'm wondering if, through the chair, perhaps he may have some comments on this initiative that might be helpful to us.
Go ahead, Dr. Mackey.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think the committee has appropriately commended the students for bringing forward a really important issue. We, as a health unit, have not fully analyzed this issue and what our role would be, but we're more than happy to play a role as appropriate. Naloxone is a very safe medication, and we see widespread access across the community as being a very positive thing. One thing we don't have, Madam Chair, is data on exactly where in the community overdoses are happening. We're working with EMS to try and acquire and analyze that data, but right now we can't, unfortunately, answer the question of whether the siting of AEDs is in proximity with those overdoses or not.
And I may be remembering, it might be a false memory, but I think the Middlesex London Health Unit, didn't you receive a Pillar Community Innovation Award with relation to naloxone, the naloxone program?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. The partners involved in the Naloxone program, London Inter-Community Health Centre, Regional HIV/AIDS Connection, and the London Area Network of Substance Users, along with the Health Unit, received an award in 2015. We were the second Naloxone program in the province, and we continue to see increasing uptake in people getting trained and using naloxone, as well as using naloxone. I think we're up to between 50 and 60 overdoses reversed in the community. That's on top of the overdoses in the temporary overdose prevention site.
Thank you. So I think if nobody has any other comments, I might make a few. I think I hear Councillor Helmer's concerns, and he makes some very good points. I'm glad that it's a referral, a report back from staff, and perhaps in that report back there may be, but through working with the Opioid Crisis Working Group, which includes the partners that Dr. Mackey identified as part of the naloxone program, so that's ideal. Perhaps there may be a better understanding of where some of these overdoses are happening, and maybe I don't want to presuppose what will come back, but perhaps we will have a better understanding of where overdoses are taking place, and target those city facilities maybe as a pilot project, and as we roll it out. So thank you very much for your delegation. I think we have a motion on the floor, and yes, and then we can open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thanks very much. That'll go to council next week. Thanks. And thank you to everybody in the gallery for coming out. And now we'll move to item 3.4, which is a delegation from Roxanne Riddle and an update on the London for All, a roadmap to end poverty report. Welcome. Go ahead.
Hi, well, sugoli swagwego lodliwa jeni ni nawal ni wa kitaloda onyota aga ni wa gohonjota agwe anego atisnageha. My name is Luke Nicholas, and I'm from Oneida Nation of the Thames First Nation, Turtle Clan. I introduce myself in my language wherever I go, because it's in my culture. They say that whenever you're going to talk about important matters, you have to introduce yourself and your family and where you come from. So that's one of the things that I get to do when I come to places like this to meet with really important people. So I just wanted to say thank you for welcoming us this evening, and I'd like to introduce Roxanne Riddle from United Way.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here.
So tonight, we're going to be talking a little bit about what's going on 1 year into the London for All. Again, I did wanted to send my gratitude for the council for starting this work, because it's such important work. We're working with the city's most vulnerable. We're working with poverty. And, the reason I jumped on board to help participate in all of this is I looked at some of the statistics. 41% of Indigenous people living in poverty in this city, and that number continues to climb. And there are statistics all over, children going to school without anything to eat. These are things that, that a committee struck that wrote this initial report. They looked into, and the Mayor's Advisory Panel published a report called London for All, a Roadmap to End Poverty in March of 2016. In 2017, United Way Here we are, thank you. In 2017, United Way was chosen as the lead agency to administer London for All. The first few months was focused on forging unlikely partnerships to establish the leadership table and the accountability tables, bringing together organizations and individuals to effect change, to effect the work of the recommendations. And we ensured that there were folks with lived and living experience involved in this work at the decision making and at the leadership tables. So. The lead agency, United Way, acts as a project manager overseeing the implementation of the 112 recommendations in the London for All. So essentially, they're responsible for bringing forward all of the partners, developing and overseeing the implementation plans, and ensuring ongoing accountability of this work. The United Way is uniquely positioned to be a lead agency because of the scope of its relationships to the City of London, community agencies, corporate partners, government, and labour. The City of London is highly supportive of this project and provides counsel and support. The city staff members are participating in both the accountability and leadership tables. Many city staff teams are engaged with the implementation of the recommendation where it aligns with their department, i.e. housing and homelessness and London Transit, which we heard a little bit about tonight. So London for All identified 112 recommendations to address poverty in our community and to ignite change. The plan to ignite change balances that what Londoners have said is urgent, what is achievable in the short term, and what builds on existing momentum and opportunities in the community. The action plan is divided into 8 domains with recommendations pertaining to an area. Each domain has an accountability table with a minimum of 1 leadership table member that participates at each table. These tables and their recommendations are reviewed, and there is an account of where we are, what is being done, and where are we going. So they're essentially looking at the recommendations, looking at their measurements, and looking where is it that we need to go moving forward. London for All is about looking at long-term solutions and system changes that require collaboration from multiple system providers. The implementation of each recommendation reflects the understanding of poverty as a rights issue, an equity issue, and a community issue with economic, social, and cultural dimensions. So of the 112 recommendations, as of this year, we have completed 27, and that is what we had earmarked in the beginning to be accomplished at this stage. 54 in progress and 31 that we are still to initiate. And of course, you can always refer to the LFA report that's provided for each of you with details. The work in the first 12 months has generated great momentum, commitment, accountability, and impact. Some recommendations were a priority of the City of London or participating organizations. Some are taking longer than anticipated as there are federal and provincial government plays a significant role in those recommendations. LFA is ensuring that the City of London continues to place a priority on addressing poverty and advocating to other levels of government for investment and policy change that will reduce poverty. Change takes deliberate effort and time. The United Way is a key contributor to the creation of a long-term meaningful change. So essentially, it's been a year. We brought together some great people from various different backgrounds to continue to bring voice and to look at these recommendations and how they can be implemented and how we can achieve real and meaningful change to our most vulnerable in this city. And I just want to acknowledge some of the work of the people who put the work into, and Dr. Chris Mackey, who's gone, who put the work and others who are significant in putting that report together. There's been a lot of movement, really significant change, and Roxanne, who has been really instrumental from United Way in ensuring that these accountability tables are moving forward. They're not stagnant. They're not staying complacent. We're looking beyond issues of politicking and trying to get to the root of the matter and really trying to find find solutions. So I really wanted to send my gratitude and appreciation to, one, the City of London and to United Way to do this important work, as well as the members of the committee and city staff who have been committed to meeting with us, finding solutions, and it's just a very exciting time. I mean, it's historic in a sense because we're looking at something head on and saying we can no longer accept this, that this is at an urgent time for all of us.
Thank you very much. I'd look to committee. Councillor Ridley, did you? No, Councillor Armstrong.
Well, thank you for your presentation and continued work on the issue of, well, poverty, basically. I guess simplifying it, it's a lot of, the big issue is that not enough people have enough money. That's simply it. And how do they access more money so that they can meet their minimum needs, employment, you know, government programming, and so on. And there are different things going on out there and strategies. So I commend you on the work you're doing. Obviously, many people are depending on your outcome. For me, quite often, you know, quite frankly, we don't, this has been going on for a long, long time. Poverty, generations, and government hasn't acted. There's inequity in income, and therefore, you know, people can't meet basic needs. And so that needs to be addressed and should have been addressed much earlier. And because of that, you know, generations have suffered. And some people, you know, they set dates out in the future, you know, let's reach that goal of, you know, in a few years or a generation. And I can't accept the generation idea because I think we need to try to meet these goals now because people are being affected by not being able to provide the basics in life or having the basics of life, you know. So in any event, continue what you're doing. I applaud you and all the others that work in this whole area of trying to make government understand that there are many people out there that are living below poverty. And so, thank you.
Your Worship?
It's incredible to see how much has been accomplished in a short period of time, and I want to express my thanks. I'm thinking back to just not so long ago when I was working with Ms. Livingston and Ms. David Beers to develop a poverty panel. We reached out to Councillor Cassidy and Dr. Chris Mackey and developed a panel, and I asked them to come back with recommendations by December, and they said, we'll quit if that's the deadline. We need a little bit more time. They came back in April of the following year with a series of very ambitious targets and 112 recommendations, some short-term, as you point out, some medium-term, and some long-term. To hear that 27 of those targets are at completion is very impressive. That's over 20% of the overall plan, recognizing this is a plan for a generation and that it requires many different stakeholders. It's a community issue. It needs the community to address it directly, as well as other levels of government, as you pointed out. But think about some of the big moves, you know, establishing a living wage in our community, reducing transit-related costs for people with low incomes through subsidy, and increasing the number of licensed childcare spaces are three of the biggest accomplishments to date. We always knew that this is not an issue that can be solved within the walls of City Hall, that it would require leadership from around the community. And I continue to be grateful for the United Way stepping forward in this leadership role and for all of the partners coming together. And so certainly as we receive this report, I'll be making a motion that we pass on a letter of acknowledgement and thanks for the work that's been accomplished today. There's lots of things that we have to do in our lives. There are things that we choose to do, and everyone that's sitting around this table has chosen to do this for some very valid and compassionate reasons. So I just want to leave my remarks at that, but thank you for the work and thank you for the presentation.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, and through you, Madam Chair, I'll also extend my thanks. It's great to get a document like this because we know we start something early on in the term and then want to see what happens. And it's nice to see what has happened here. I think you've made some good choices as what to prioritize. A lot of the things that are completed were the advocacy initiatives that you decided upon. And of course, that's great because you immediately get somebody else working on something while you move ahead with your own goals. So I think that's very well done too. And as I said, you know, it's nice to have some closure on this in terms of seeing what was happening, because we know it's out there, we know you're working hard, but for us to actually see this itemized by recommendation is great. So I wish you all the best moving forward with these things. It's exciting. The mayor has described some of the big achievements, and I think we're looking forward to seeing more with your help.
Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to make a few comments. Thank you so much for coming. I always look forward to your updates. And it's, as one of the members of the poverty panel, I feel very moved. And I know, sorry. It was something we talked about a lot, and I'm looking at Lynn Livingston and Sandra Datersbeer, because the hardest work was done by city staff. And Trevor Fowler? Trevor Fowler. They worked really, really hard. They kept the panel focused and going where we needed to go to develop this report. A recurring phrase was, we didn't want this to sit on a shelf. And thanks to you, and thanks to the members of the accountability tables and the leadership table, it has not sat on a shelf. And I know that of the 12-month recommendations, the ones we hoped to achieve in the first 12 months, I think they have all been accomplished. Is that true?
Not quite all of them, some, like, they're in process. There were 27 identified to be done, and I laughed at United Way because I was determined to have more, and they're exactly 27. They're not all the 27 that were identified, just that some are taking a little bit longer than we had expected.
I know there were a couple around transit that weren't in the first 12 months that this council did pass, so that makes me feel very proud of this council as well. There was a comment about a generation being too long, but there are 112 recommendations, and they're not all going to wait for a whole generation to be accomplished. We've already achieved 27 of them. So it's a work in progress. It's something that we have to keep chipping away at. And the first thing, I think in our very first meeting, we identified it as a community problem. It's something that affects us all. It's something that costs us all in many, many ways, not just lost economic opportunity, lost employment from people who can't connect with the employers that need employees, and we have employees that are looking for employers, and there's that inability for them to connect. So there are so many costs to the community and to society in general to allow this problem to continue. So thank you so much for your work. I'm looking forward to the next update. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to say it has really been an honor on behalf of United Way, the people that I get to work with. And I hate always pointing out, because there's so many people involved in this project, and people who really feel it's time and are really putting a lot of energy in. But I do have to say that Sandra's name and Lynn's name and Cheryl's name comes up a lot in the community, so people are really acknowledging their great leadership too.
And thank you for mentioning Cheryl Smith back there. I'm sorry, Cheryl, that I didn't get to you. And I want to say, through me, to staff, please thank all the staff involved. I know that there are countless others behind the scenes that didn't get mentioned, and please thank them for all of us. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, and I do think that really good progress has been made so far, and I just wanted to ask about a couple of the ones that are still to come. They're categorized as still to come, and if you wanted to speak to any of those in terms of, you know, we're partway through 2018. A lot of the sort of timelines for these is 2020, so in some ways that's a fair amount of time, in some ways it's not very much for the ones that are still to come. So specifically under the changing mindsets area, there's 3 there, 1.6, 1.8, and 1.9. The first one there is about strengthening relationships and partnerships between municipal leaders, Indigenous peoples, and community groups. 1.8 is about publicly acknowledging and supporting the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, and 1.9 is strengthening programs to counteract violence against women and support them in the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. So there's obviously a bit of a theme between those 3, and I wonder if you want to speak to that in terms of where we see that going between now and 2020, when it's going to get underway fully, and where we see the prospects for those 3.
Well, I think there's considerable attention and focus that's being put into how we're looking at changing mindset. It's a big focus. It's a big topic. It's a very heavy one. It's one, how do you change things at in a very fundamental way. But the conversations are starting with organizations like ADLOSA, like SOHAC, the Southwest Ontario Aboriginal Health Access Centre, Namarin Friendship Centre. These organizations are making a difference in the Indigenous community and are in fact implementing in many ways that work at the ground level. Whether it's missing and murdered Indigenous women or the Truth and Reconciliation. In fact, I know that there's undergoing a number of activities right now at ADLOSA that are going to bring some broad attention to the issues of truth and reconciliation and the 94 recommendations that are made here So I think there is some significant work that's starting to take place there. We as a committee still needs to ask those questions, those hard questions about exactly what direction do we take that, because there are some very broad recommendations in that regard. And how do we measure that?
We've also spent a great deal of time with the committees to define, like, this is what the definition means, this is what we need to accomplish to say that it's completed, and to get, you know, some of these tables, like 26, 28 people at a table, to get them to agree to that. It's quite an emotional process. When I say these 27 are completed, like, it was in writing, we said this is what we need to do, it's done, and then people are like, yeah, but you know, we can do a bit more. So even though they're completed, we're still working on those 2, but just great partnerships in the community, helping with all of them.
Thank you, and if I could just move on to a couple of other areas. So I think that's really helpful. You know, like I appreciate these check-ins, and it's also good to get a sense of where we're headed, also where we have been, and I really appreciate the context of, okay, that's a very big thing, and you know, for London for All, this is the part that we're going to be focused on, because obviously just truth and reconciliation, just one of those 3 things, it's a big undertaking that I'm not expecting your group to address all by itself. Okay, 2.20, so 220, providing supports to address bad credit by collaborating with the financial sector to provide banking alternatives and credit counseling, limiting the need for predatory lending. This is something that's come up at this committee a couple of times. I know Councillor Salee was advocating for some regulatory approaches when it comes to predatory lending, and I wonder, how is that going? Where do we see that headed between now and 2020?
So you picked one of the 31 that's still to come. A meeting with Councillor Salee is in one of the recommendations for me to do. But the income and employment table, this is a recommendation that will be addressed at our next meeting. That income and employment table has the most recommendations, so that's just one we haven't created a work plan for yet.
Thank you. And the one that's right after that, I'm mostly going to ask about the ones that are still to come, just to be clear. 221, the reorganizing individual social assistance funds to make it easier. So that sounds like something that's going to be in coordination with Mr. Beer's area. And I wonder what are the prospects for that in terms of hitting that 2020 timeline?
Through the chair, we are already in process of doing a number of things in this respect, and we're hoping at some point in time to be able to actually move our social assistance payments to cards, like reloadable cards. We have moved already to the use of grocery cards as opposed to food vouchers, and so that's been a really positive thing in terms of our way to, in the past has been to provide food vouchers to people, they then take it to a store to get food, but we've actually moved to reloadable cards. It's certainly a more appropriate and less marginalized way to help people when they need to get food.
Thank you very much. And for 3.3, this is, sorry, not 3.3, 3.4, expanding local no-cost dental programs for Londoners living with low income. I did just want to flag, and I think it's actually come up here before, but and Dr. Mackey certainly knows about it. But the health unit is working in partnership with SOHAC on a clinic focused on Indigenous people to make sure that they can access culturally safe dental services. Many of those folks are also low income and they're experiencing barriers to access in dental care. So I'm not sure if that's on the radar. Everyone seems to be nodding, so I'm sure you know about it. But it does seem like something's underway there. And so I know that one's marked as still to come, and in some ways it still is, but it at least is underway. And I just wanted to say the last one in terms of the governance of the whole undertaking. I was really glad to see, it says something at the end about 160 volunteers involved, and obviously that's a lot of people. The fact that about a quarter of them are people who have lived experience, I think is really important. I know that was something that came up in the work of the poverty panel. And in terms of implementation, you know, on an ongoing basis to have folks that have lived experience involved in a governance way. I think that's really important, and I was glad to see that it's gone through like consistently. That, you know, 30, I think it's 36 or 38 people. That's no small feat. You know, I think it's really good, and it might be one of the reasons why everything is on track. You know, that people are really holding people accountable about progress on a lot of these fronts and all the different tables. And I think that's a really good sign. So I want to say that.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor. Anyone else? Okay, so we can have a motion on the floor to receive the delegation and receive the. So we're receiving the delegation, and the mayor has also asked that we thank the volunteers of the accountability and leadership tables and all the volunteers involved. Okay, so the mayor will move that. And I'll second that. And I'll open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thanks again. Thanks very much. So we'll move to item 3.5, which is a public participation meeting regarding Parks and Recreation Area bylaw amendments and feeding of wildlife in parks and other administrative revisions. So I'll look for a motion to open the PPM. Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Sali, and I'll open the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
I'll go to staff first for an introduction to this.
I wasn't sure if we needed an introduction to this, but it's some minor administrative changes, and the main one is a feeding bylaw for wild animals in parks. So it is a parks bylaw, it's not a citywide bylaw, and it's to try and address some issues that have happened since the last time we revised our bylaw. We went with the depositing of refuse at that time. This time we're going with a little more precise item, 250 milliliters of feed. It allows our bylaw officers to have a gauge and a target that they can meet and that people are exceeding if they're feeding in bulk. And that's what we're trying to prevent. It's the feeding of bulk, as it says in the report, it does harm to the animals, it does harms to our park users, it creates unsafe conditions for runs and charity runs, and this is a way to deal with that issue.
So I'll look to the gallery to see if anybody would like to comment on this. No? And I see one member in the gallery, and she has indicated that she's not interested in commenting, and there's nobody else, so I'll look for somebody to move closure. Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Sali, and I'll call the vote to close the public participation meeting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Committee, you may or may not have noticed that we've received an email from Councillor Hubert on this matter. It will be attached to the report. The clerk will pass it out now. Councillor Sali, do you have a question or a comment?
Yes, and I had a chance to glance at Deputy Mayor Hubert's intent. I think he wanted to send it back, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So I just wanted to ask quickly to staff, is there any issue with that?
So I believe what we prefer to do is, because this is a parks-related bylaw and the letter from Councillor Hubert is to address this issue on a private property issue as well. So to accept this and change the bylaw as far as the parks bylaw goes, as far as this report goes, and then refer back to staff as far as dealing with the private property matter in a different venue.
So can I do what he said? Sounds good to me.
So Councillor Sully would like to move the staff recommendation on the Parks and Recreation bylaw amendments, and Part B, refer Councillor Hubert's letter to staff. Is that correct? Refer back to staff for possible, like, do you want to elaborate on that or just keep it at referral?
I'm just really trying to capture the intent of Hubert, who's not here, as well as make sure that staff are able to do what they need to do. As long as they're comfortable with the wording, I'm good.
Mr. Kotzfess.
Through the chair, yes. Please refer it to staff, and we can report back on that specific issue.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. I was just wondering if someone could help to educate me on two portions. One is in regards to fines attached. Often when we see the bylaw, we see a set schedule of fines. So I don't know if that is related to the parks bylaws as well. And if you can help me, I just didn't see it in here. And my second question was in regards to consultation on some of the changes. If you can let me know the process that we went through for some of the recommended changes, not specifically the bulk feeding of wildlife change, but some of the other changes.
Yes, we worked with the Animal Advisory Committee, so we met with them, I think the report says on May 3rd. Worked with our gender inclusivity group and diversity to work on some of the language there, and worked with Chantel on some of the trained service animal pieces as well. And some of them are simply issues like the managing director said his or her designate, and we changed to their designate, and some language along those lines. As far as the set fines, I'm actually going to refer to my colleague here because he briefed me on that as well, and he's more versed in that, so I'm going to move it over to Mr. Kotzebue for that.
Through the chair, we typically apply to the courts for set fines. I think it's done through our legal department, and it takes about four to 6 weeks.
Any other comments? The motion is up if you wanted to take a peek. It's moved by Councillor Sally and seconded by Mayor Brown. I'm not seeing any other comments. If you're okay with the motion, then I will call the vote. I've called the vote, Councillor. Okay, so let's vote on this and then I'll go back to you. You're just stretching? No.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Councillor Sully.
Hi, Madam Chair. I think there's a member of the public here who's been waiting patiently for number 4.4. I don't want to assume, but I think maybe, I'm not sure if that's Penny Moore up there. Maybe it is. So I just wanted to kind of bring that to your attention.
Thank you, Councillor. My apologies to Ms. Moore. We can do that item next. So let's go to item 4.4. And Ms. Moore, go ahead.
I can't see what's up there.
One quick second. The committee first has to approve your delegation request.
Okay.
It's moved by Councillor Sally, seconded by Councillor Armstrong, and I'll call the vote. We'll just vote manually on that. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Go ahead.
I can't see what it's not on the screen.
I think there's a motion from the staff recommendation, maybe? Oh, my apologies.
It's up there now. It's loading. Maybe staff could introduce that.
Through the chair, basically the report consists of two parts. The first is to receive the information within the report. The second is for a direction from council to civic administration, and that staff would amend two bylaws. One would be the public nuisance bylaw to regulate abusive or insulting language that unnecessarily interferes with the use and enjoyment of public space by other persons. And the second would be to amend the sound bylaw to regulate amplified live speech. And we would consequently bring back draft regulations for consideration at a PPM.
Thank you.
Okay. Basically what it is with the public nuisance bylaw, I was watching the news and they mentioned about them heckling and not just women, but I have experienced people with disabilities. I'm in a wheelchair. you heard my group, I'm also a member of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and I take paratransit a lot, and I'm also downtown a lot. And I have been blocked on the sidewalk where I cannot move. There may be one or two or three of them that have circled me. I have had where they've thrown insults that, oh, get up, God has blessed you, you can walk and all this stuff. You don't belong in a wheelchair, you don't belong in society and all this. And also, I've had it where I'm trying to get on my ride to go home on paratransit, and they even tried to block me from getting on my ride. This is a right to society. This is inclusive. I believe in religion, but there is a way, and do not force it on people. And if I don't want anything to do with it, please, like, I don't think they have the right to block me, even to get access home. Like I said, it's almost like an insult. And like I said, it's not just women, it's children, it's people, like every walk of life. Like even men that are not like them, I would say. But like I think this has to be controlled because like it's almost like 4 corners in the city.
Thank you very much. Mayor Brown.
Just a question, Chair, if we're dealing with the delegation and then the report, or are we dealing with them together?
We're finished with the delegation, so now we're moving on to the report.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank Ms. Moore for coming forward today and for writing the letter. I know that my office has received dozens and dozens and dozens of phone calls and emails and complaints about this matter, and I can tell you that our city staff have received 50 complaints at least last year. The London Police Service have received the same. And what people are asking is what can we as a community do about situations where people are being personally, verbally abused on our streets. And there is no question in my mind that fundamental to being a Canadian is to have the right to freedom of speech, to have the right to freedom of religion, but all of our freedoms have limits, and I think that this report clearly articulates where that line is drawn. People ask me, is it a fine line? I think certainly it's a fine line, but this report articulates what that line is, and people from our community, mothers and fathers and individuals and children should expect to be able to go to public spaces and not see people being personally, verbally abused. And I think that I am wholeheartedly in support of what we have before us, both parts of the recommendation, both the nuisance bylaw as well as the amplified sound bylaw amendments. And I also recognize how important it is that we engage with our community from a public participation perspective as well. Not that it's required, not only that it's required, but I think it's the absolute right thing to do. People want a say on this issue, and the sooner we're able to move forward on this, the better. In my mind, I think that that our community is losing its patience in some cases. I've seen videos on social media. I've seen issues where stress levels are increasing in situations like this, and I think it's incumbent upon us to deal with this as quickly as possible. So I'd like that to be part of the motion, that we direct staff to make this a priority, set up that public participation meeting as quickly as possible so that we can deal with this. And my last comment, Chair, would be to members of the public who are experiencing these types of situations or are experiencing others in our community going through these types of terrible situations, is to remain calm, is to do your best to walk away from the situation, to not engage with the individual or individuals, and then please report it. Report it to our bylaw officers, report it to the London Police Service, because unless this is reported, it can't be tracked. And I'll leave my comments at that, but I'd like some language on the motion that I'll be moving, which is in support of the staff recommendation that this be done as quickly as possible, and that public participation meeting be held as quickly as possible. I see Mr. Kotsifas has something to say.
Through the chair, I misspoke a little bit. You don't necessarily need to have a PPM, so just given the nature of the amendments, so given that we could expedite this quite quickly and likely be back possibly in July, we will target for that. So unless committee and council wishes us to direct us to have a PPM, we don't necessarily need to have it.
Do you want to comment on that? So Mr. Kotsifas has
I'm
said.
very interested in hearing what my colleagues have to say about that, knowing that PPM isn't required, knowing that this is what I would describe as an urgent situation in our community. I'd be willing to support the changes today.
Mr. Mayor, and people that do want to comment on it, when staff report back with the draft bylaw, people could request delegation status as well. Any other comments from committee? Councillor Sally?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just had a question. As far as if this is to be supported and then come back with a draft bylaw, how does staff operationalize this, and what does it look like? Because I want to make sure that the community doesn't have an expectation that might not necessarily be met. Because I'm just wondering, I know that there's some bylaws that are hard for us to enforce, you know, sometimes when people like do things.
Through the chair. As far as enforcement, I'll break it down in the two pieces. Under public nuisance, I believe that depending on the wording of the offense, we would probably need the person that received the personal invective to come forward as a witness to provide that evidence. On the sound bylaw, I believe if we were thinking of regulating it, not banning it, and putting conditions around it, that's something that the bylaw enforcement officers could observe themselves.
Thank you, that was very helpful. I guess as far as I know that there's a clause around there where we talk about, or not a clause, but there's a mention about the charter and just kind of any concerns with that. Do we anticipate any kind of challenges, legal challenges, or, you know, or is it, will there be a report that comes back separate for legal advice and separate to this, or just wanted to touch on that because I'm sure that's going to be asked of us at some point.
If you wish to receive, through you, Madam Chair, if you wish to receive legal advice with respect to charter challenges, potential charter challenges, that should be done in camera. And if you wanted that at the time of the bylaws coming forward, we could provide that.
Sure. So I don't expect that you might not have a fulsome report at this time. So I think that'd be appropriate to get that. But I just want to think to do our due diligence at that point to have that information.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Helmer?
Well, I support getting a report on both those two bylaws, the nuisance one and the sound. Having witnessed some of this happening on the street myself, it doesn't seem like there's a way to resolve it without a bylaw. And I've actually met with a couple of these folks. Last time I was in the news, they were worried, I guess, about what council was going to do. And so they wandered into the councilor's office just looking to talk to a councilor, and I met with them, and I talked to them for a while, and at one point I just said, have you thought about just stopping what you're doing and just don't say really insulting, vile things to people all the time? And they're clearly not willing to do that. I mean, it's not just like there's two people who are doing it, but there's, unfortunately, it just keeps going on and on. And I think we need to do something about it. And it's just not acceptable to have people who are just walking by in the street, going about their day, have to put up with that kind of disgusting language. And it's one thing to have opinions. It's another thing to treat people with respect and not attack them verbally. So I think we need to have something on the books that's going to deal with it. I think there's a way to do it that's respectful of people's charter rights to free expression. I'm glad we're not dealing with the amplified noise in the zoning bylaw, as everyone knows.
Okay, so since I don't see any other comments, I have a question. Ms. Chapman, you mentioned that the person who's being verbally abused would have to come forward as a witness. Since this often happens at very busy intersections in downtown, would it have to be the person where the abuse is directed as the witness? Because there are multiple witnesses to these occurrences. Would any witness do?
Through the chair, I believe if there were witnesses that firsthand observed this, I believe they could come forward as well.
I just wanted to make sure of that because I know some people may be not unwilling or reticent. So as long as we can still enforce the bylaw that way. So the motion is up if you would like to look at it. And if I could find a seconder on that. Councillor Armstrong has indicated he will second, and the mayor is moving the motion. So we're all good. I will open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thanks very much, Ms. Moore, for coming. So we're going to get a draft bylaw back from staff on this matter. Okay, so we'll go back to item 4.1, which is the 6th report of the Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Advisory Committee. So there was a brochure included in the agenda package. There was an error in it, and the committee has included a revised brochure in the added agenda.
Did you need?
So the committee has a number of asks. It's not just receiving their reports, so I wonder if committee would like to take a careful look at that. Councillor Sully?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think I'm fine to move it. I just believe they're just asking for a representative from LPS, London Police Service Board, yeah, so that's me, to attend, and education, awareness, and as well as an email, so I think the asks are reasonable, so I'm happy to support that, and then, yeah, I'll move that.
So they are also asking for a dedicated email account set up for their advisory committee and a smart in quotes URL for the advisory committee on the city website. Councillor Helmer.
A couple of these requests seem like things that perhaps don't need to come to committee. So, I mean, I'm not opposed to them, but perhaps we could handle this at the administrative level. Isn't this kind of straightforward and not needing to be discussed at committee?
So it's just the way that advisory committees report to the standing committees. So it's part of their agenda. it's reported by the clerk in their report, and then it ends up here.
Let me be a bit more specific. So there's the request to create a specific email address and the request to change URL on the website or set up a URL on the website. The decision-making process from an advisory committee meeting to standing committee meeting to council is extremely long. These are things that literally would take minutes to do. And they're IT staff sort of things, like, you know, you want an email address, you go and set up. You want a URL, you create one. And I just think it's a very bad process for small changes. And I just feel like there's things that come up at advisory committees that don't need to be resolutions of municipal councils and that can just be handled. I don't want to go on and on about it, but I just wanted to point it out.
I agree with you, Councillor. So, because now we have to pass a resolution at council that this advisory committee get its dedicated email account and URL. So is there a recommendation that we can make to clerks perhaps, as they support advisory committees, to give them direction to handle these kinds of administrative tasks without it coming to standing committee and council?
I made my point. I'm not going to keep talking about it at committee. Part of my problem is we're talking about it at committee, and I'm done.
All right, we have a mover in Councillor Salee, and we have Councillor Armstrong indicating that he would like to second this motion. And I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, item 4.2 is the fifth report of the London Housing Advisory Committee. I need a mover to receive that report, and moved by Councillor Mayor Brown and seconded by Councillor Sully. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So the final item is a letter from Jerry McCartney, the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm just a little confused myself as to why that has come to this committee instead of corporate services. I wonder if clerks could comment on that.
Can we receive and then send to the appropriate standing committee, or?
Okay, I guess to the clerks, is one standing committee able to refer an item to another standing committee, or does council have to do that?
It would be appropriate for this committee to make that recommendation to council, and then the decision-making body is council. The reason I believe it's on this agenda is its relationship to, the matter's relationship to health and safety and community safety, and those pieces being in this mandate.
Mayor Brown.
Well, I think I'd like to make a motion to receive the letter from the Chamber of Commerce. They're really important community partners that advocate on any number of issues at a provincial and local level. This looks like a provincial message that's gone out like really across the province to all 444 municipalities. And if I'm not mistaken, we're doing many, if not all, of these recommendations already. And so I think I'd like to make a recommendation to receive this, thank the Chamber for their ongoing involvement, and carry on.
Okay, Mayor's moved that. Anybody want to second it? Counselor Armstrong? Any comments? I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, we have the deferred matters list. Counselor Sully's moving that. Counselor Armstrong is seconding it. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Looking for a motion to adjourn. Council, oh, is there any additional business? No. Counselor Armstrong has moved adjournment. Counselor Sully is seconding it. I'll call the vote. Oh, it's manual. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.